Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was about halfway home when the first weird thing happened. It was late August. The kind of dusk that hangs warm on your shoulders even after the sun drops. I'd taken my usual shortcut through the old rail path that cuts between Baker Street and the housing development. You can shave 10 minutes off if you push your bike through the underpass. Headphones off because my mom says don't be stupid at night, and I like the quiet anyway. The crickets, somebody's radio leaking through a window, the occasional dog bark, normal summer evening stuff. The small oddities started slow. There was a light up ahead at the underpass that usually flickered and buzzed, but tonight it was steady, almost too steady, like someone had replaced a bulb with a new one that didn't belong. I thought about it and kept pedaling. Then, a car went by on the street above, and its radio shrieked with static for about 3 seconds before settling on a song. That was my next weird thing. The song, cut like a record scratch, came back and the driver didn't seem to notice. I called out, "You okay?" But the car was already past. By the time I pushed the bike under the bridge, the air felt different, like someone had wrapped the path in cotton. The usual wind that comes down the hollow was gone. My sneakers scuffed a little more than usual on the gravel. I remember thinking, for no good reason, that the hum of the city was thinner than it should be. I reached the clearing where the path opens to the street and paused to check my phone. No messages, battery fine, and then the dog on the corner started barking, like its throat had disconnected from the rest of the world and decided to scream. It went on and then cut out mid-bark, which is a weird sound to hear if you've never heard it before. Not silence exactly, but an abrupt stop. I pushed my bike into the road there because I hate riding through the subdivision. Folks are messy with their sprinklers and kids. That's when I noticed the sky. The stars were starting to come out, not many yet, just the bright ones, but a patch of the heavens above the north end of town looked off, darker, like someone had pulled a sweater over that bit of sky. I squinted, shading my eyes with my hand, and at the same time a low hum started beneath me. Not in my ears at first, but in my chest, the kind of bass you feel at a concert if you stand too close to the speakers. It was steady and flat, a tone that didn't change pitch. I looked up properly then. I don't know why I did, but there it was. A triangular shadow the size of 3 houses, just above the tree line. It blocked the stars in a clean, straight triangle. No lights, no blinking red beacons you get on planes. Just a matte darkness like a cutout placed against the sky. It moved so slow that I thought maybe I was imagining speed. Planes move with engines and stars streak differently. This thing drifted like a page sailing down in slow motion. My first thought was drones. Lots of folks around here mess with drones. But drones make a sound. They hum sharp and close, little frantic rotary notes. This hum was different, long, low, like wind in a pipe, and it didn't come from the thing in the sky so much as from the air between me and it. My throat went dry. I remember that detail because I tried to swallow a few times and felt like the sound swallowed the motion. For a few seconds, I just stood there. The street was empty. The neighbor's porch light swung a little in its chain but didn't flicker. A branch on the maple near the curb hung completely still. Even my bike seemed loud in the silence when I moved the kickstand. Then something else happened that made my stomach take a running leap upward. The humming cut off. Not faded, not a slow dying. It stopped like someone flipped a switch. Everything that had been part of the background snapped back into motion at once. Someone honked 2 blocks over, a kid on a skateboard laughed, a dog started yapping like he remembered how. The triangle was gone. It vanished so cleanly that for a second I thought I'd blinked. One instant there was a heavy dark shape, and a pressure that made my ears feel funny. The next, the sky was as it always was at dusk, only with more stars appearing as if someone had suddenly unzipped a velvet curtain. The sense of wrong was still there, though. That odd, tight feeling in my chest you get when your brain knows a rule and something broke it. I pedaled the rest of the way slowly. The streetlight seemed a little dimmer, but steady. I checked my phone again, no missed calls, no weird notifications. The GPS timestamp on the screen matched the clock in my head. I got home, shut the garage door, left the bike in the mudroom. My mom asked how practice was. I said fine, made dinner, tried to act normal. She asked what took me so long, and I told her I'd taken the scenic route because my legs felt like pedaling. She laughed and said okay, and we moved on. I didn't tell her at first. There's always this small voice that says, don't tell, because people will roll their eyes and hand you the standard list. Bad pizza, tired eyes, too many late nights. I told my friend Luis an hour later when I texted him a dumb meme. He was quiet for a bit and then wrote back, "You see that triangle too?" My cousin called from the highway, said the same. That was the first time the memory unbottled for me and didn't taste totally insane. Luis and I met up the next morning at the diner. He'd been out late too, but had been farther north. Said his headlights picked out a dark shape down near the old mill building. Same slow movement. We both tried not to make too much of it. People trade stories. Memory edits itself. But the two of us comparing details made it feel less like a weird dream. He said his truck radio had gone dead for a minute while the thing passed, which fit with the silence I'd heard fall after the humming stopped. That afternoon, I went back with my bike and a flashlight because I wanted to see if there was anything on the lawn, the road, the gutters, some physical trace of what had been overhead. There was nothing. Grass unpressed, tire tracks only from cars. A smear of tar on the curb looked like the usual, not like anything melted or burned. The only odd thing was a thin film of condensation on the inside of my bike helmet, where I'd left it that morning on the porch. I wiped it and thought that was probably sweat from last night, but the way it felt cold made me mention it to Luis later, and he said his dog had been shaking even though it wasn't cold out. Weeks went by and nothing else big happened, though there were smaller strangenesses. A group of streetlights by the community center blinked in a pattern for 6 seconds one night, and nobody could explain why the control box was fine. The highway cameras recorded an odd shadow passing over the overpass, but with no recognizable edges. The footage was fuzzy in a way the tech people said could be compression. Old Mr. Helper from 3 blocks over swore his barn radio went static at 9:17 p.m. The night I'd seen it, and that his chickens got quiet for a whole minute. I kept riding my bike. You don't stop living because one thing you can't explain brushes your life. But I found myself looking up more, especially when I was near that underpass with the steady light. If I heard a low hum, now it made me tense, fingers tight on the handlebars, waiting for something to cut out or fall apart. The triangle never came back to my part of town, at least not while I was watching. But sometimes I'd catch a flicker on the horizon when the clouds were thin and think I saw a corner of it moving against the stars. People say we live in a world with cameras on every corner, that nothing truly vanishes. That's true enough, but the thing I saw didn't leave a photo, or if it did, the frame collapsed into static. The only evidence I have is my own memory, Luis's, that old farmer's chicken silence. That and the way a normal evening rewired itself for a moment into something else. I told my mom eventually because she noticed I was jumpier, asking if I wanted her to drive me to practice. She listened and then asked if I'd called the sheriff. I said no. What would I say? There was a big dark triangle in the sky and my phone was quiet. She sighed and told me to keep my head down. Her way of saying she worried without making it worse. Night still feels different sometimes. When I'm pedaling down that rail path, I glance up and check the sky. It's probably the same stars as always, but the habit of looking has stuck. If you asked me to explain what I saw, I'd say it was a shape that didn't belong, slower than engines, quieter than wind. I'd say the hum cut out like a curtain closing, and the world went on as if nothing had happened. I don't know what else to say, and I don't have a neat way to finish this off, because there isn't one. I came home that night. I slept. The days kept happening. Sometimes, when the wind dies down and the underpass light is a little too steady, I lock my bike up at the end of the driveway and watch the sky for a while, not expecting anything to return, only knowing I'm looking now in case it does. I pulled into the cul-de-sac with a load of boxes still in the back and my scanner buzzing the route for the last stop. It was late November and a wet fog had been hanging all evening, making the streetlights halo like old coins. I'd been making the evening runs for 3 months now. Insulin kits, a pizza place, some habit of the month boxes for the same handful of people, and this small, tidy circle of houses was always the end of my night. Maybe 7 cars were parked, driveways empty. I killed the engine to avoid waking anyone and grabbed the cart. The fog felt close enough to touch, the kind that beads on your jacket and makes your glasses smear. I stepped off the curb and the first little wrong thing happened. The dog in the crane's yard, the one that barks at my truck every time I back in, stopped mid-growl. It didn't trail off. It cut out like someone turned a switch. Silence ate the sound the second the cart wheels hit the asphalt. I told myself it was a coincidence. Dogs do that. But the porch light at the cranes blinked once right then, and the Johnsons across the circle blinked in the same beat. I kept walking, a box under each arm, and watched the pattern play out. Porch lights on every house in the cul-de-sac. Crane, Johnson, Rivera, the small one with the crooked railing, flickering as if they were all tied to the same timer, and some hand was pawing at the knob. My scanner gave a little chirp. I felt my pocket and then went soft. I hit the power button and the screen came back, but the map had jumped forward by 5 street names and then reset. GPS sometimes shivered on me when the fog gets heavy, so I tamped it down as a tech glitch, pushed the cart and rang the first door. Mrs. Rivera answered with her robe wrapped tight. She squinted at me like she does whenever I come in with a package and say, "Evening." I handed over the box and she tucked it in like she always does. The porch light behind her blinked twice in rhythm with the others. She didn't notice. I didn't want to bring up the blinking. You get a lot of looks in this job. I moved to the next house, the little wrong things stacked up. The street lamp near the circle that usually hums had a clean, brittle note when I touched the metal post, and the metal felt warmer than it should in damp air, like a radiator instead of a light pole. My phone, which usually has at least a bar here, registered no service for a stretch. I clicked the home button, checked the time. The dash clock in the van said 9:43. My watch, the cheap digital kind I keep under my sleeve, read 9:43 too. Everything lined up right there. When I was 3 doors from the end, I stopped because all the porch lights pitched into a single small rhythm, off, on, off, like a message in a slow code. The motion was so coordinated it looked choreographed, as if a single hand were skimming them all. I swear I felt the hair on my neck lift, and I'm not a superstitious guy. I just feel patterns, and then I notice them. There was a faint glow that had been collecting in the sky, a seam of light against the low cloud deck, and at first I thought it was the sodium glow from the highway bending weirdly through the fog. Then it moved. Not fast. It slid behind the clouds like the underside of something luminescent was gliding along a hidden track. It kept a wrong kind of silence. No motors, no whoosh, no leaves to give it away. The fog above the cul-de-sac seemed to thin where it passed, like someone had brushed a finger and left a smudge. I looked up and the small group of porch lights blinked in the same rhythm as before, but now they seemed to be answering that slow, sliding glow. The hair on my arms prickled. I reached for my phone again. The screen stuttered and then a little triangle in the corner flashed, no bars, then steadied. I fumbled the device. When I swiped to the camera, the screen froze for a second with a greenish smear. Then it worked. I pointed it at the seam, and the phone took a picture that showed only an even smear of grain and light. Pixels. Nothing I could hand anyone and say, "Look." I turned my head back to the houses, because the blinking had a cadence that felt like it would resolve if you watched. Houses are lamps and shades and people's routines. They were supposed to be ordinary. I expected to see movement outside a window, a neighbor pulling a curtain, a porch light that didn't want to cooperate. Instead, the lights were steady. No more rhythm. They sat normal, bulbs humming their steady glow as if some time had passed where the whole cul-de-sac had been paused, and then, snap, returned. That snap did something to me. It dropped a note of absurd relief into my chest. I shouldered the box and pushed towards the last house like a man on autopilot, the fog clinging to my collar. The driveway was wet, and my boots left prints that filled with bead-like water. At the door, the bell chimed thin, and Mrs. Crane's voice called out for me to leave it on the step. I set the box down, and she came out carrying a towel to wipe her hands. She smiled and thanked me like any night. I walked back to the van, muscles loose as cloth. On the way, another small wrong thing happened. The wind died entirely. That might not sound like much until you live in a place where the wind keeps the low fog moving. It fell away so complete that a loose tarp on a neighbor's trash can stopped flapping mid-ripple. Sound pooled. The world folded into a narrow pocket of quiet that made the pavement seem too loud. My own footsteps sounded like someone miming them out. I sat in the driver's seat for a while, idling, not wanting to look up and risk seeing the seam again. I wanted the instruments to lie. The scanner chirped back to life on the third try, and the map snapped to my route like nothing had happened. I told myself to load the cart back in, finish the route, be done, get home. Rational talk to anchor a moment that had gone sideways. I drove off the circle slow, lights on low, fog whitening the edges of the headlights, and I kept checking the rear view. I never saw the seam again. The sky looked like the normal, heavy cloud cover of late fall. The porch lights stayed steady as I passed. My watch read 9:57 when I rolled through the stop sign. My phone pinged a late text from dispatch a minute later, asking why I was running 17 minutes behind. At home, I unloaded the van, stacked the empty boxes, and boiled water. Habit sends a lot of men to the kettle after an odd night. The kettle clicked and went through its usual motions. I kept glancing at the window and upstairs at the clock, testing time like a wound. The kettle sang. The wall clock ticked steady. The world reassembled itself into the shape I trusted. All night, I kept checking the street outside with breeds of vigilance I didn't recognize. I lay awake longer than I should have and listened. The fog thinned toward morning. My phone finally caught a bar and filled with texts asking if anyone else had router's glitch, whether our neighborhood had been in the news, if I'd seen any unusual lights. I answered with half sentences. Work was the next day, and the morning felt ordinary in a way that felt false. The route had new trash bags at the end of each driveway like a normal week. Mrs. Rivera waved when I passed the house with her dog trotting at her heel, tail sweeping like it had done for years. I mentioned the blinking to Marco at the depot like I do with small anomalies, the broken scanner, the weird dog behavior, and he gave his typical shrug and said, "Probably a power hiccup. Lines are old around there." But the seam had moved. It had left its mark in the way the lights had answered, and in the small scrapes of time that didn't add up in my head. When I passed that cul-de-sac again the following week, the same neat circle of houses looked exactly the way circles of houses always looked. Kids left a bike on the curb, and some teenager had scrawled something on the mailbox with a Sharpie. The fog was absent that day, the sky cut clean. I've told a couple of friends and they nod and make jokes about downtown drones and holiday light installers. I haven't posted pictures. The ones I did take are nothing but grain and cheap smear. The scanner log had a gap that tech couldn't explain cleanly. Just a footnote. Signal loss. Dispatch chalked it up to weather interference and moved on. I don't know if I would be telling you this if the dog hadn't quit barking or if every porch light hadn't answered in time. Maybe it would have sat in the file of odd single things you forget. But the way it pulled at a pattern, sound stopping, lights answering, the seam sliding, made me notice how thin the membrane is between the normal and whatever sits just past it. I went home that night. I made the tea. I stacked the empty boxes in the garage. I did all the things that tell a body everything is still as it was. Sometimes, if I get out late now and the fog's right, I slow my van at the end of that cul-de-sac and sit for a minute. The street is quiet and the porch lights are steady. The fog will sometimes crease the clouds toward the west, and I find myself reflexively scanning the seam between streetlight and cloud just to see if what slid there will drift again. It hasn't. The world keeps its shape. I keep my watch set to the van's dash clock. The dog still barks sometimes, but it looks at the sky a little longer than it used to, and that is enough to make me look up too. The ground under my sleeping pad started to hum before anything else did. I woke because the vibration was insistent enough to move my elbow in the tent. It wasn't the soft, regular weight of a passing truck on the distant forest road. This was thin and steady, like a bass note pressed into earth. I lay there for a second, thinking it was a rainstorm or my imagination, then unzipped the flap and peered out. The treetops were leaning the same way. Not a breeze, not a gust, not that random rustle you get when a squirrel runs along a branch. Every crown on the ridge across the creek angled in the same direction and held. The leaves didn't shimmer. They held that tilt, like someone had tilted the whole forest to one side. My headlamp beam skimmed the pine needles, and they didn't move except to reflect the light back. Above them, a long, pale glow was sliding across the sky. It wasn't a dot or a flash. It was a soft, stretched light, maybe the shape of a canoe if a canoe were blown up and lit from inside. It moved slow, in one clean glide without edges, more a suggestion of something than a form. Silent. No rumble, no wing wash, nothing. The reflection of it made the creek look like it was breathing white under the dark. The ground under my pad vibrated in time with that light, a faint pulse through the soil that sounded like a far-off train if you put your ear to the rail. My name's Nate. I'd hiked up into the Laurel Hollow area for 2 nights by myself. No signal, no one at the parking lot, the sort of trip you take to get a clean head. I'd set the tent on a small bench near a tributary because it was flat and I liked the sound of the water. I knew the route. Creek, switchback, the ridge, then down to where the old logging road flattened. I'd locked the car, walked in at dusk, saw 1 or 2 other headlamps far off on a different spur. Nothing out of the ordinary until a dozen small things that are easy to ignore stacked in a row and made a pattern. Before I set up, there had been the deer. I cut across a meadow and 5 of them froze in the brush like cutouts. Not running, not startled, just statues with their heads turned the same direction. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds while my heart did that slow thud thing, and then one blinked and they melted into the trees, and that was that. I chalked it up to the way deer are. Then there was the headlamp I passed on the way in. I heard the rustle at the shelter ridge, and the beam swung once and died like someone had dropped their batteries. I called out and got nothing back. Later that night, I walked by the same spot and the lamp was gone. No footprint, no drop pack, nothing. When I reached camp, I found my small compass lying in the tent vestibule with the needle dancing like a drunk. Not a slow wobble, full spins 10 degrees back, then another snap. I'd had that compass since college. It wasn't fragile. I blamed it on the magnet in the stove lid, but the stove was in the bag and the bag had been zipped when I left. It calmed, eventually, but I remembered it because it felt like the world was making small exceptions to its own rules. The stream that night was louder than I expected, but sound was doing weird things everywhere. Some of the owls were quiet, and the frogs stopped altogether at 11 when I looked at my watch. I assumed a cold front had moved in. The clouds had been thick earlier, broken now into a dark river of sky, low like someone had folded the heavens. The weather app on my phone didn't load. I didn't expect it to, but the barometer on my little handheld read steady, which made the sudden silence all the more notable. The glow kept sliding. It moved just outside the tree line, following the ridge. It didn't blink, it didn't sharpen, just flowed like a slow tide. The breath in my chest kept catching because everything else that normally says, "This is fine," the leaves, the insects, the damn creek, had become an audience frozen in a theater. I unzipped the tent all the way and crawled out in my socks. The dirt underfoot was cool, and when I crouched down, I could feel the vibration clearer. It wasn't like a single thump. It was a steady, double-tap pulse that ran along the root lines and made the grass hum. My phone screen stayed black when I tapped it. No camera, no map, nothing. No bars, which is normal up there, but it felt wrong to be so cut off with something like that overhead. I made a stupid decision. I grabbed the little binoculars from the pack. Up close, the glow didn't show structure. You couldn't tell if it was something big far away or something thin and close. The edges were soft, and it moved as if it were being pulled on a string with a gardener's patience. When I held the lenses steady, my breath fogged the glass, and for a second, a smear of my own breathing covered half the view, and I saw nothing but the smear, and then the glow was gone, swallowed by the night. The treetops dropped back, and the undergrowth started making their normal sounds, a cautious return like fingers unclenching. That loss, both the suddenness of the vanishing and the way my watch seemed to read a time that didn't match what I remembered, was what stayed with me most. I checked the watch because I always do. It read 1:04 a.m. I blinked and thought, no, I'd sat up earlier at midnight for a second, had looked at it, and it said 12:46. When I checked again, my watch slid calmly to 1:05, as if nothing odd had happened. Time felt elastic in that moment, like a rubber band pulled then let go. I didn't start hiking out until first light, partly because I wanted daylight to make me braver, and partly because I thought maybe I dreamt it. The route down felt normal at first. The creek, the rooty switchbacks, the blazes on the oaks, but the forest kept giving me small signs that something had been there. My trail marker tape, bright orange, was gone from a spot I'd tied one to for later sighting, and in its place the bark had a narrow scratch like a fingernail across a ledger. I found another marker a quarter-mile on, lodged in the crotch of a sapling, folded around like someone had retied it and left. No footprints, no trash, just those odd, precise little rearrangements. I met one other person coming up as I was heading out, an older woman with a day pack and a dog. She waved and said good morning like we do in places where people know each other's faces. "You camping?" she asked. I'll tell you how I answered. I shrugged and said yeah. Just a quick overnight. She didn't press. Later, she told a story to whoever would listen about lights she'd seen years ago and how animals react, and I thought about stopping her to ask if she'd noticed anything the night before, but I didn't. There's a way people tell certain things. They look at you with the expectation you'll nod, and then they move on. Maybe she'd seen this once and filed it under anomalies. The descent back to the car took longer than it should have. Somewhere on the old logging bridge, I had to stop because both my knees felt like they'd been pinged by a bolt of cold. The air tasted different, like it had been filtered, and my chest kept fluttering in a way that made me check my pulse a stupid number of times. The radio in the parking lot, the one on my friend's truck that I used to check the weather, was static when I flicked it on. I sat for a few minutes just watching for other cars. By the time I drove out of the forest and onto the paved county road, it was nearly noon. The sun had burned off the low cloud in bands, and the sky looked ordinary. I remember glancing at the tree line from the car window, and the pines looked smaller somehow, as if the night had inflated them, then deflated them. I texted my sister when I hit a signal island up on the highway, told her I was coming home a day early. Her reply was, "What you expect. Good. Bring coffee." I almost called her and said, "Don't go into the Laurel Hollow if you can avoid it." But I didn't. How do you put the words together without sounding like a half-formed thing? Driving home, the funny aftermath set in, a kind of alert curiosity that kept me aware of every passing shadow and streetlight. At a gas station, I checked the footage on a dash cam, and there was nothing but my truck, the timestamp, and then a short blank white frame that appeared at the exact period when the glow had passed. The clerk shrugged when I asked, said his camera sometimes hiccuped. He didn't spend the kind of money to look for the hiccup. I didn't push. That night, in my apartment, I lay awake until 2 a.m., lights off, listening for the hum that had once run under me. There was nothing but the building's machinery, the elevator, a pipe clanging occasionally when someone above took a shower. The planets were clear in the window. I thought about going back the next weekend with someone, a friend who knows how to handle the dark, but the idea of the routine of a second trip felt wrong, as if by replaying it I'd break something sealed. I told two friends about it in the week after, one that I go hiking with a lot and one who's obsessed with weather anomalies. They both had soft ways of deflecting. Maybe it was lenticular clouds. Maybe you were really tired. The weather friend said the treetops could look like that with certain microbursts, and the watch could be a glitch. I didn't say the binoculars showed nothing when the glass fogged. I didn't say the vibration was like a note under the ground. I left out how the river looked when that light's reflection passed, like something had smoothed its skin and then gone. Weeks pass, and you tuck things away. You unpack the moment, fold it into your usual narrative like a stray receipt in a wallet. But the habit stuck. I look up at the sky more than I used to. Sometimes at the edge of night, I will stand on my balcony and watch cloud banks crawl and wait, stupidly, as if I've trained my eye to a cue. Most of the time, there's nothing but light pollution and the drone of traffic. I went back to Laurel Hollow last month during the day, walked the ridge, checked the trees. The orange marker tapes I'd hung were where I'd left them. The old logging bridge had a new plank. Someone had been there. The scratch on the bark is still there, thin and pale, like a scar on a hand. I run my thumb over it and it feels ordinary. Just healed wood. No one I spoke with had at that moment seen anything odd. They'd heard the usual stories about lights over the county, not one specific recollection, just a sense that the place carriers old events. So that's it. I went up for a night, something odd crawled the sky, and the forest behaved like an audience that forgot how to breathe. I came home. I sleep in a bed that doesn't hum under it. I make coffee in the morning and drive to work and pay attention to small things that used to drift by me. I don't have a tidy explanation. I don't have footage anyone reliable would accept. I have the memory of treetops leaning together and a pale, long light sliding silent across clouds while the ground under my tent pulsed like a bass note. That memory lives with the rest of the things you try to shrug off but find yourself checking for anyway, the way something that shouldn't happen did, and how everything resumed as if some rule had been paused and then resumed, leaving a space in your day where it had been. My phone buzzed on the table, and when I looked down, it was Mark's name on the screen with a single message. You need to see this. Now. He lived 3 houses down, a guy I'd worked with for years, and trusted to not prank me over something dumb. I unlocked my screen and walked outside to the backyard while he called. He met me at the gate with his hands full of trash bags and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "This is weird," he said, and when he took my phone back to cue the clip, his fingers were shaking just enough that I could see it. The video was shot vertically like a quick phone job, and the first thing I saw was our backyard at night. My fence, my shed, the swing set, and then a soft, steady glow hovering above the grass. It didn't pulse or flicker. It sat in one place like someone had held a lamp in the dark and refused to let it move. Mark didn't narrate. He didn't need to. He tapped the play bar forward and back to show me the moment again. In the clip, the light stayed fixed as if the world around it had been edited out. The shadows it made on the lawn were oddly clean. No sway from leaves, no interruption from the telephone wire overhead. The video had depth. You could tell it was over the lawn, not a reflection on the shed. For a few seconds, I forgot to breathe. "Where did you shoot that from?" I asked. "By the side of the driveway. I walked down to take the bins out and saw it through your fence. Thought I should call you. Thought you'd want to look." He swallowed and then muttered, "It's not a drone. No sound." We watched it twice more, slow and then at normal speed. The file lagged on the last frame, as if the phone couldn't decide whether to keep the glow in memory. Then Mark hit stop, and his face tightened. "I saved it," he said, "but I want you to see it again before I delete it from my phone, in case it messes with anything." He handed the phone back, and I watched him scroll to the clip and play it. The same soft white orb hovered above my grass, indifferent. When it ended, I handed the phone back to him. He swore he'd email it to me. He said he'd copy it to his laptop. He said he'd back it up. He said all the things you say when you're trying to make something real. An hour later, I texted Mark and asked if he'd sent it. No reply. At 2 the next morning, I knocked on his door. He opened it bleary-eyed and shaking his head. "It's gone," he said without preamble. "I had it. It was here. I swear. I went to show Jenna and the file wasn't there on my phone anymore." He swiped through his camera roll anyway. There were photos of his kids, a sushi receipt, a blurry selfie from last week, no clip from my yard. He checked his cloud backup and the folder that would have held it. Empty. That was the start of it, the thing that made the night feel like something you'd only half enter. You saw something impossible. Everyone agreed that it had been there, and then the small piece of evidence unspooled like a cheap film. There were signs before that night, little things should have paid better attention to and didn't. The porch light had been going dim and bright for a week. Nothing terrible, just a slow stutter at odd hours that I replaced with a new bulb and swore it wouldn't do it again. Winston, my Labrador, had taken to staring at the back fence at night, ears flat, tail tucked, but when I went outside, there was never anything to see. My neighbor, Tanya, told me on Tuesday that she'd woken to her phone buzzing at 3 a.m. with a weather alert that showed a radar pause over our block for exactly 7 minutes. She shrugged it off as a glitch. I kept thinking, that's tech for you. It always does odd things. Between Mark's video and his sudden loss of it, things escalated in ways that were small and specific. The porch camera, the cheap unit I'd stapled up last summer, had a corrupted file the morning after Mark's show and tell. The motion log said activity at 1:12 a.m. Just a white frame. One frame, then nothing. The camera rebooted itself and showed nothing else. I pulled the SD card and plugged it into my laptop. The file was listed, but 0 bytes. The software threw errors when I tried to repair it. Card corrupted, it said, and I canned the message like bad advice. I went a week feeling like I'd slipped sideways into an alternate routine where ordinary objects misbehaved. My phone's battery ran down faster than it should. The microwave clock blinked 1:13 a.m. for 2 mornings despite being plugged in and working the rest of the day. Winston refused to go out after sunset, and when he did, he pulled like someone else was holding the leash. I started doing the little things you do to anchor yourself. I checked all the windows before bed. I wrote down the time when I walked the dog. I texted Mark and asked if he'd tried a different phone or computer to transfer the file. He said he had, and that every copy vanished the same way. Present 1 second, gone the next. I tried to be methodical. I borrowed an external drive from work and asked my neighbor Lisa if she'd copy anything she had that night, just in case. She hadn't filmed a thing, but she'd looked out and seen my backyard bathed in a mild light for a few minutes. Like a yard party you didn't know about, she said. Then it stopped and the whole street smelled weird, kind of like when someone burns copper. She frowned when she said it, like saying it made it more real. We checked the street for physical effects. There were none obvious. No scorch marks, no melted grass, no obvious footprints. In the morning, the lawn looked as it always did, a bit patchy near the swing set. But on the strip of grass near the center of the yard, exactly where the video had shown the glow hovering, I noticed the dew had been pushed down in a tidy oval the size of a coffee table. I ran my hand through it and felt nothing more than the cool dampness of condensed water. The ground underneath felt normal. That lack of damage bothered me more than any burn mark might have. It suggested something that could enter the world quietly and not touch it, like an animal that took only the sound of itself. It made me imagine the light being patient, waiting for the right moment when no one was looking directly, and then leaving without a trace. Mark grew more agitated. He checked and rechecked his phone like someone looking for a letter that might appear in the mailbox at any moment. He called Jenna's parents to ask whether they'd seen anything on their cameras. Nothing. He even tried to bring me the phone and show me where the clip had been stored, but by then the icon for the file was an empty rectangle. His cloud account showed a 0-byte file with the right name and the wrong timestamp. I did what people do. I started to collect coincidences. The streetlight at the corner, newly installed last fall, blinked out for an hour the night after Mark's file disappeared. The radio in my truck cut to static for a full minute while I was pausing at the stoplight where the drive meets the main road. On a Thursday, the neighbor's cat Simon came scratching at my door, soaking wet though it hadn't rained. His fur left a ring on the welcome mat that, when wiped, smelled faintly metallic. There are ways to explain all of that. There are always ways. Electromagnetic interference, a failing sensor, some idiot with a box truck with extra lighting. It's nervous to say you don't have an explanation, because people like to fix things with explanations. I'm the kind of person who likes to name causes and knock them down one by one, but the harder I looked, the less tidy the answers became. One evening, Mark knocked on my door again, eyes hollow, and thrust his phone forward. I didn't believe it, he said, but 2 nights ago, I saw it again. He swore he'd put the phone in airplane mode and taped it under the dash while he filmed. He handed it to me and I watched. The clip began with his driveway, then a white glow above my backyard appeared. It hung, then tilted as if the light had a top and a bottom, and for a breath we watched it breathe. My hands were cold when the file ended. I asked to keep the phone. He looked relieved and let me take it home to copy it to every device I could borrow. I sat in the glow of the laptop and dragged files onto external drives like a man who thinks the act of copying is the same as preserving. The file transferred. I opened it. Black. I looked at the file name. The timestamp had changed from 11:02 p.m. to 3:03 a.m. The file size was 0. I checked the file properties like you check a stopped clock, expecting it to start again. I called Mark. He answered on the first ring. "It's like it never existed," he said. "I swear, Aaron, I could swear." He told me about a smell after the light left, sharp and coppery, that made his mouth taste like pennies. And my dog Benny woke up the next day with his color warm as if someone had been touching it. I started, leaving my laptop on a chair facing the backyard at night, with the external drive connected and the software set to record anything the webcam could see. I left the audio running as a dumb, stubborn machine that might catch something human ears missed. I put the phone on airplane mode and slid it into a Tupperware container on the table. Little rituals to try to stop the evaporation of evidence. Dogs barked across the street sometimes, and the distant sound of an ATV woke me once. By 3 a.m, I was too tired for vigilance. When I pulled the footage the next morning, the files were there and showed the expected grainy darkness. At 2:58 a.m. there was, according to the timestamp, a white frame. The camera's clock matched my laptop's clock, but the frame was just that, a white square. The video resumed with nothing unusual. The audio had a couple of seconds of a low hum, nothing like thunder, more like the vibration of a distant transformer, but the levels were within normal background noise. I replayed it until my eyes blurred. I stopped telling the story to people who didn't already know. Their faces went polite at the edges when I described the file behaving like a living thing, appearing and disappearing by whim. Maybe it was an artifact, one friend offered. Maybe some compression bug. That answer asked me to believe my eyes and not my hands. There are other small things I'll write down because they mattered to me in the moment. The way my kettle hissed a little higher that week, like it wanted to make noise. The odd way Winston refused to sleep outside, though he loves the porch. The way my watch sometimes read 3:03 after I'd checked it at 11. I kept a list because it made me feel like I was doing something concrete. We never got the video back. Mark's phone was fine otherwise, no other corrupt files, no missing photos, but the clip from my backyard was a hole, and the hole seemed to have a memory of light. He swore he'd tried the shop that specializes in recovery. They ran a dozen tests and sent us a polite email that said files could not be recovered from a 0-byte placeholder. They suggested we preserve the device and not use it to overwrite any potential sectors. We did what we could and then stopped because there isn't much to do beyond that. At night, I find myself standing at the kitchen window more often, not exactly looking for anything but listening for the hush that came before the light. Sometimes, years later, I still slow down when I pass the back gate and glance at the strip of grass where the dew pressed into the soil. It looks like any suburban yard. Nothing else stands out. The neighbors' kids play, the sprinklers come on at dawn. Life keeps its ordinary rhythms. I don't have a picture to show anyone now. I have only the memory of Mark's phone in his hand, the way the video looked, and how we both instinctively reached for proof that we could touch. I also have the memory of the file gone, not lost to human error, not corrupted in the usual way, but absent as if someone had decided the world didn't need another record. Maybe it was a trick of technology. Maybe it was the way some nights fold into others in these neighborhoods, full of cars and radio waves and lights. Or maybe it was something small and patient that hovered long enough to register on a camera and then chose to be unrecorded. I don't know which explanation troubles me more, that something happened and vanished without trace, or that my devices simply refused to keep its memory for me. Either way, I kept the external drive plugged in for months. That's out of habit more than hope. And when friends asked, I told the same story, leaving out the part where I check my phone at night to make sure a stupid file doesn't blink out while I'm sleeping. It was a little after 2 in the morning when I gave up on trying to sleep. It was one of those humid summer nights in Brooklyn where the air inside your apartment feels like someone's breathing right next to your face. I'd already flipped my pillow twice, drank water, turned the fan up, but nothing helped. So I got up, slipped on some shorts, and went out onto the fire escape to get some air. I live in Clinton Hill, third floor of a brownstone that's been split into apartments. The building's old but sturdy, and the roof's accessible through a small door in the hallway. Usually no one goes up there except when the landlord's checking the vents, but I like to sneak up sometimes when I can't sleep. It's quiet, and you can see a good chunk of the skyline. That night, the city was muffled. You could still hear the faint hum of traffic on the BQE, but it wasn't loud. The air smelled like hot concrete and someone's leftover takeout from another window. The sky was this dull, grayish purple, the kind you get from light pollution mixing with humidity. No stars, just that glow. I sat on the low wall by the edge, facing toward Manhattan. The Empire State Building was lit up blue and white, cutting through the haze. I stayed there for a while, just zoning out. Then I noticed it. There was a single white light high above the skyline. At first, I thought it was a plane heading toward LaGuardia, but it wasn't moving. Not at all. It hung there, tiny but sharp, pure white, no blinking, no color change. I figured maybe it was a drone, though it seemed too high for that. Way higher than any drone I'd seen around here. I watched it for a minute, waiting for it to shift. Nothing. It didn't even seem to drift like stars do over time. Just perfectly still. After a while, I realized how quiet everything had gotten. I hadn't noticed before, but the usual night sounds, sirens in the distance, music from someone's car, the occasional shout, were gone. Even the crickets that sometimes chirped in the courtyard had gone silent. It felt like the air had thickened. I kept staring at that light. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. My brain started going through the usual explanations. Plane holding pattern, maybe a helicopter hovering, though there were no red or green side lights. And if it was a chopper, I should have heard it. Then out of nowhere, the light flickered. Not like it blinked off, but like it wavered, stretched slightly, then snapped back into place. I leaned forward, trying to focus. A second later, it moved. It didn't rise or fall. It shot sideways, fast. Not gradually accelerating, just instantly moving left across the sky like a ruler sliding across a desk. It covered what looked like miles of sky in less than a second, then stopped dead. No arc, no sound, no trail. I remember my breath catching in my throat. The movement was so clean, it didn't even look real, like an animation glitch. It stayed there, in its new spot, just hanging again. I counted to 10, eyes locked on it, and it didn't budge. Then it darted again, back the other direction, even farther this time, and froze again. I said out loud, "What the fuck?" There was no one to hear me. For a few seconds, I thought maybe it was my eyes, like I'd moved my head slightly and it created the illusion of movement. So I tested it. I fixed my line of sight on the edge of a rooftop antenna and compared the light's position. It wasn't me. It was really moving. The air felt heavier then, like it does before a storm. But the clouds hadn't changed. No wind, no rumble of thunder. Just this weight pressing down and that light hanging there like it was aware of me. It stayed in that last position for maybe another minute, maybe 2. I lost track of time because I couldn't look away. My heartbeat was loud enough that it filled my ears. Then, just when I started to think it was over, it made one last movement. It shot straight up. Not gradually, not at an angle, straight up, vertical. It accelerated so fast that the light became a streak, then vanished into the haze. No fade out, no dimming. Gone, like someone had turned off a switch. The moment it disappeared, the sounds of the city came back all at once. I heard a siren somewhere near Myrtle, a car horn, faint music from an open window. Even the air changed. It felt lighter, easier to breathe. I stayed sitting there for a while, just staring at the empty patch of sky where it had been. Nothing else moved up there. I half expected another light to appear, but it didn't. Eventually, I went back inside. I didn't even bother checking my phone or trying to film it. I hadn't thought to while it was happening. My hands were shaking a little. I got into bed, but I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that light snapping sideways. The next morning, I told my neighbor, Luis, about it. He laughed at first, thought I was joking, then said he'd seen weird lights once over Red Hook that looked like that. Fast and silent, but he figured they were experimental drones. That made sense on paper, but this thing had been higher than any drone could fly without losing signal. I tried looking up flight paths from LaGuardia and JFK later that day. Nothing matched what I saw. No aircraft in that position at that time. A couple nights later, around the same hour, I went back up to the roof. The air was cooler that night, a little breezy. The sky was clear enough that I could see a few faint stars. I stood there scanning the same patch of sky just in case. Nothing. But after about 15 minutes, I noticed something else. This faint buzzing sound, like an electrical hum, coming from somewhere above me. Not loud, but constant. I looked around for the source, but there were no transformers nearby, no air conditioners running. The sound seemed to be coming from the sky itself. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then stopped. The next morning, my phone's compass app wouldn't work. I tried recalibrating it, but it just spun slowly, never settling. It stayed that way for most of the day, then fixed itself the following evening. I didn't connect those things at first, but they stuck in my mind. The silence, the hum, the compass glitch, all small, but strange enough to feel related somehow. A week went by, and I figured I'd let it go. Then one night, I was watching TV around 11, and the screen flickered for half a second. Just static, like an old VHS rewind. At the same time, I heard a single short tone like feedback from my speaker. When I glanced at the window, there was a faint white glow reflected in the glass. I thought maybe it was a plane again, but when I looked outside, the sky was empty. It wasn't as dramatic as the first night, but it left me with that same heavy feeling in my chest, like whatever that thing had been wasn't far away. Since then, I haven't gone up to the roof after midnight. I still think about that light sometimes when I see planes overhead, how steady they move, how normal their blinking looks. I start to imagine what it would look like if one of them suddenly darted sideways the way that light did. I've told a few people, but no one really knows what to say. It's easier to just file it under weird New York stuff and move on. But sometimes when the nights are quiet enough, I'll stand at my window and stare up at that same patch of sky, half expecting it to be there again. Perfectly still, perfectly silent, waiting. I woke up sometime after 2 in the morning, probably around the time my dog, Benny, usually shifted in his bed. At first I thought it was him moving, but then I noticed the sound, a low, constant hum coming from outside. Not like an engine or a neighbor's generator. It had this smooth, steady pitch, like a tone you'd hear in a sound bath, but darker. The kind that presses against your chest without making a single vibration you can feel. I sat up in bed and squinted at the window. My blinds were half closed, but I could make out something on the lawn. It wasn't quite bright, more like a faint glow hovering just above the grass. The shape of it was perfect, a circle maybe 6 or 7 feet across. Frost had formed on it, but only inside the circle, sparkling faintly blue. The rest of the lawn was completely normal. I rubbed my eyes and blinked, thinking it might be some reflection, or maybe streetlight bouncing off ice in a weird way. It stayed there, humming softly. Benny started growling low in his throat, his fur bristling. He usually didn't do that unless there was someone on the property, but I didn't see anyone. I slowly pulled on my slippers and padded over to the window, careful not to make a sound. The closer I got, the more it felt wrong. Not cold wrong, not dangerous wrong, just impossible wrong. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight, but the screen flickered, then died. I looked at the battery, full when I'd gone to bed. I tried turning it on again, same thing. In the back of my mind, I noticed that the humming seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. It wasn't a normal rhythm. It accelerated when I moved, slowed when I stopped. My stomach knotted. After a minute or two, I did what I probably shouldn't have. I stepped outside. The air was crisp, almost biting. I kept Benny close, his leash tight in my hand. The frost circle was exactly the same up close. Perfectly round, the edges crisp and glowing that faint, unnatural blue. The grass inside it was brittle, frosty, and colder than it should have been, but the ground around it was fine. The more I looked at it, the more I realized the circle wasn't melting at all. The frost stayed, even though the lawn had a thin layer of dew that would normally start evaporating in the cold air. I crouched down and ran my fingers just above it. The frost didn't crumble under me, didn't feel wet or rough. It was just suspended, like it was frozen in a thin layer that didn't quite touch the ground. Benny whimpered and tugged at the leash, and the sound of his nails against the grass seemed absurdly loud. Then I noticed movement at the edges of my vision. Nothing I could focus on directly, but something flickering, faint and blue, like the edges of the circle were shifting just slightly. Every time I turned my head, it vanished. I stepped back, and the circle seemed to shrink slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if it was responding to me. I decided to go back inside, telling myself it was frost forming in a weird pattern, that the glow was a reflection or my brain making things up. But when I turned toward the house, I stopped. The hum got louder, almost urgent, and Benny froze. The streetlights didn't reach the edge of the lawn, and the fog that had rolled in was thin but heavy enough to blur shapes. There was a darker shadow hovering just above the grass on the opposite side of the circle. Not a person, not a tree, just a shape. I didn't move. My hand tightened on the leash. The shadow shifted slightly, pulsing with the blue glow from the frost. Then the humming changed pitch, going higher for a few seconds, then dropping lower. It was deliberate, like someone or something was modulating it. I stepped back, almost tripping over a garden hose. The frost circle didn't change, but I could swear the edges rippled slightly, like it was breathing. I tried calling Benny to me, but my voice sounded tinny, distant. He barked once, sharp, and the shadow flickered again, then vanished. I ran inside and locked the door, keeping Benny close. The hum faded over a few seconds. I grabbed a coat and a flashlight, thinking I'd go outside again, but when I looked out the window, the frost circle was gone. The lawn was normal, wet with dew, no trace of frost. My heart was racing so badly I could feel it in my throat. The next morning, the air had warmed a little, and the frost that usually clung to the grass was gone entirely. I checked the lawn carefully. Nothing. No mark, no ring, no sign anything unusual had been there. I called Caleb later, my neighbor who always joked about alien sightings, and told him. He paused, then said he hadn't seen anything, but he'd heard his dog whining outside the night before and some strange humming. Since then, little things have been off. My phone battery drains way faster than it should, especially overnight. Lights flicker in odd patterns, usually near windows facing the lawn. Benny stares at the yard sometimes, growling low, for no reason. And on clear nights, I can almost hear it again. That low hum, just at the edge of hearing, like it's waiting. I've checked the frost circle spot every day since. Nothing. Grass is fine, soil is normal, no frost forming, no residue. But sometimes when I'm inside and it's completely quiet, I swear I can faint blue glow along the edge of the lawn, just at the periphery of my vision. I turn to look, and it's gone. I keep telling myself it's nothing. Frost, fog, imagination. But Benny hasn't stopped growling at it, and I know he wouldn't. I don't want to go out there at night again, not really, but a part of me knows I'll have to eventually, just to see if it comes back. Until then, I watch from the window, the hum faintly echoing in my chest, and I try not to blink. I was driving back from my sister's place in Peoria. It was late, close to midnight, and I'd taken the back roads because I can't stand the interstate at night. All the headlights and semis make me tense. Route 29 cuts through farmland for miles, and that stretch between Glassford and Manito is basically empty except for a few mailboxes and old barns. I had the window cracked just enough to let the air in, and the radio was low. Some local AM station playing old country songs. The sky was overcast but bright in that weird way it gets when the moon's hiding behind clouds. I remember passing a gas station about 20 minutes earlier, and after that it was just flat land and cornfields. The road curved left a bit, then straightened, and that's when I saw it. A vertical column of pale blue light, like a beam from a spotlight, but narrower, solid-looking somehow, shining straight down from the clouds into a cornfield on my right. It wasn't moving, not even slightly. It didn't flicker or spread out like a normal beam does when it hits dust or fog. It was just a single smooth line of light, maybe 15 or 20 feet across, bright enough that I could see the tops of the corn stalks glowing faintly where it hit. I slowed down because I thought maybe it was a police chopper or some construction thing, but there wasn't any sound at all. No hum, no blades, nothing. Just my tires on the asphalt. The light looked weirdly perfect, like it wasn't cutting through the air, like it was just there. It didn't make sense. I rolled down the window more and leaned toward the passenger side to get a better look. The radio had gone fuzzy, not total static, but a kind of low, warbling interference. It reminded me of when you drive under power lines, except there weren't any around. I pulled over onto the shoulder because my curiosity got the better of me. I turned off my headlights and just sat there for a second, watching that light. From where I was parked, I could see the whole column end to end, maybe 50 yards out in the field. The clouds above it were glowing faintly blue where the beam touched them. The weirdest thing was how steady it all looked. No movement, no flickering. The light didn't seem to come from anything. Like the top of it just disappeared into the clouds. I kept expecting to hear an engine, but it stayed completely silent. After maybe 30 seconds, I noticed my dashboard clock. The numbers were faint, dimmer than usual. The temperature gauge needle was twitching. The radio had gone to total static now, just a soft hiss. I turned the knob to shut it off, but it didn't respond right away. The knob turned, but the sound stayed for a few seconds, then finally cut. I thought maybe the alternator was going, which would have been just my luck that late at night. So I shifted back into drive, figuring I'd keep moving and see if the light changed. As I rolled forward, the road curved slightly again, putting me almost directly beneath the thing. The moment I passed under it, everything in the car shut off. The headlights, the dash, even the engine. It was like someone hit a master switch. I didn't even have time to react. No sputtering, no dimming. Just total dead silence and darkness. The car coasted forward a few feet, tires crunching the edge of the pavement, before everything came back on all at once. Engine running, lights blazing, radio crackling back to life. The clock jumped ahead 3 minutes, and the temperature gauge settled back where it should have been. I pulled over again 100 yards later, heart hammering, trying to process what just happened. The light was gone. I mean, completely. No fadings, heck, no flicker. Just gone. The sky looked totally normal again, clouds drifting, nothing unusual. I sat there for a long time. The cornfield looked like any other field in the dark, maybe a little fog hanging near the ground. I stepped out for a second, thinking maybe there'd be a sound, insects, wind, anything, but it was dead quiet. Even the air felt strange, heavy somehow. I didn't stay out of the car long, my hands were shaking, and I just wanted to get moving again. Once I got a few miles down the road, I started seeing normal signs of life again. A porch light here, a lit barn window there. It felt like the world had snapped back to normal. When I finally hit town, I pulled into a Casey's to grab a drink and calm down. The guy behind the counter, probably my age, looked half asleep. I asked him what time it was, just to check. He pointed to the clock above the register, 12:43. My dashboard clock said 12:53, 10 minutes difference. I don't know why, but that detail stuck with me more than anything else. I even pulled out my phone to check, but it had reset itself. The screen flashed like it had just powered on, showing 12:53:2. I didn't mention the light to the guy. I just paid for my drink and left. On the drive home, I kept looking in the mirrors, half expecting to see that blue glow behind me again, but there was nothing, just empty road and the faint hum of the tires. The next morning, I drove back out there. I figured maybe I'd find something, scorch marks, a piece of equipment, maybe even just tire tracks from somebody else who stopped. But the shoulder looked undisturbed, and the field itself was ordinary. Corn plants, dew on the leaves, nothing flattened or burned. I walked out a bit, close to where I thought the beam had touched down. The only thing I noticed was that the air still smelled faintly metallic, like after lightning. A few days later, I mentioned it to my sister, just in passing. She said she'd heard about spotlights being used for crop dusting, but I've lived in Illinois my whole life. Nobody sprays at midnight under cloud cover, and those beams don't cut out your engine. The car's worked fine ever since. I had the alternator checked just to be sure, and the mechanic said it was solid. He did say my battery terminals looked unusually clean, like they'd been scrubbed. I hadn't touched them. Sometimes I think maybe it was just some kind of freak electrical thing, a power surge, ball lightning, whatever. But I keep coming back to how precise that light looked, like it wasn't spreading or fading at the edges, like it was holding its shape. And I can't explain why everything shut down for exactly 3 seconds, or why my clock jumped ahead 3 minutes after, or why my phone reset itself. That stretch of road looks completely normal in daylight. I've driven it a dozen times since. But every time I pass that bend, I feel this weird hesitation, like I'm waiting for the blue light to drop back down from the clouds again. It never has. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever that was, it wasn't some random glitch. It felt too deliberate, too focused, like it knew exactly where I was going to be. That night, I wasn't the only one out there either. When I replay it in my head, I swear I remember seeing faint headlights in the distance on the other side of the field, like another car had stopped too, but I never saw it pass me later. Sometimes I think about that more than the light itself. I set the trail camera up behind the shed because the raccoons had been getting into the compost bin every night. It was late October, the kind of cold that makes your fingertips ache, and the yard had that leaf-thin smell of fall. I didn't expect much. A few raccoon selfies, maybe a possum or two. I wanted footage so I could figure out how they were getting in without standing out there freezing every night. The camera was the cheap one my brother gave me last year. Motion trigger, infrared, decent battery life. I mounted it about 5 feet off the ground on an old fence post where it could see the shed, the compost, and a strip of the wood line. Set it on 3-shot mode with 10-second intervals and high sensitivity. I checked the SD card, made sure the date and time were right, and left it. Rain had been forecast but held off. The night was clear and quiet. I didn't really expect to be surprised when I pulled the card out the next morning. I had coffee in my hand and the dog at my feet, and I was thinking about calling my boss when I clicked the first folder open on my laptop. Every photo was the same. Not the same as in same raccoon in different poses, but literally the same thing in frame after frame. A faint column of light descending from the top of the photo toward the ground. It wasn't a streak or a comet. It was a soft, vertical shaft, like someone had hit a long, pale droplet of moonlight against the trees and let it slide down. On some frames, it reached all the way to the compost bin. On others, it stopped a few feet above the grass. The camera's night vision rendered it in pale gray and white, so the column looked like smoke made of light. At first, I thought the camera was glitching. I scrolled through the images, 1, 2, 300 of them in sequence. And the column was there in almost every shot. The timestamps ran from 2:07 a.m. to 2:31 a.m., 3-shot bursts every 10 seconds like I had set it. Battery voltage read normal in the file headers, no low power warnings. The SD card showed plenty of space. Nothing else in the photos moved much. The shed silhouette, the tree line, the dark bulk of the compost, no animals, no headlights, just that column. I called my brother and left a voicemail because it felt ridiculous to talk about. "You have to see this," I said into my phone. He answered an hour later, half asleep and trying to be helpful. "Maybe light from a house? Someone walking with a spotlight?" he said. I told him the neighbors' houses face the road. Their lights don't point into our yard. There are no houses north of the property line. The only road for half a mile is the county lane, and those photos show the column directly over the yard, not the road. I went outside with the laptop on impulse because you can get a different feel standing where the camera stood. The air was thin and raw. The leaves crunched under my boots. I couldn't smell anything unusual. The dog sniffed at the compost like he does every morning and then sat down and stared at the fence post. He was quiet in a way that set my teeth on edge. Neighbors had smart lights and ring cameras on their porches. I walked down to Claire's place across the lane and showed her the images on my phone. She's practical, a nurse, the sort who gets called for real emergencies. She tapped the screen, frowned, and suggested we drive the lane to see if any house's lights might line up oddly with the camera. We drove slow. Nothing. No construction lights, no cars had been in the lane that night. Claire checked her security footage and said it was empty. I put the images in a folder and stayed with them all morning. On the 25th photo, the column was slightly wider, like the top had unfurled. On the 32nd, it had a faint, darker core, something inside it that the infrared camera rendered as a softer shadow. On the 48th, it shivered sideways as if some wind blew through it, but there was no motion blur elsewhere. The shed's shadow didn't move. The only thing that changed was the shaft itself, frame by frame, descending like a slow elevator. By noon, I'd convinced myself of 3 things. The camera didn't lie about what it saw, the neighbors didn't account for it, and it wasn't on the ground when it began. The column resolved a few feet above the compost in some shots, then touched down on bare grass in others, and then it was gone altogether later in the sequence. There was a gap of several images where the exposure looked the same, as if the camera had taken a break. Then the column appeared again farther to the left, not quite vertical. I backed up copies of the SD card and printed a couple of frames to show people. That felt like old-timey evidence, which I suppose it was. That night, I took the camera in, charged new batteries, and set it again on the same post, switching it to video. I wanted to catch movement to see whether the column had any sound or motion I couldn't infer from stills. I climbed the fence, tightened the strap, and felt stupid doing it. The sky overhead was star-pricked and clear. The owl called twice in the trees and then stopped. I went to bed with my head full of maybe and probably not. At 3:17 a.m., the motion alarm on my phone buzzed. I sat bolt upright. My phone had been on the nightstand, muted, but the app gave a vibration even on silence. I ran downstairs and opened the video file. The footage was shaky. I kept the camera on the post earlier than any rules would recommend. An honest amateur. The first minute was blank trees, black grass. Then the column dropped down from the sky, slow at first, then faster, a quiet, luminous rope moving through the air. It didn't make a sound the camera caught. Audio was a thin line of static. The column's edge looked clean and distinct, and for one breath length, the way it slid toward the compost made the hairs on my arms stand up. It met the ground, and the ground under it lit like paper under a lamp, but there was no scorch mark or steam. I grabbed my coat and stumbled outside. The temperature hit my face hard. The night smelled like cut grass and nothing else. I walked the path the camera had seen and knelt where the shaft had come down. The grass around the compost felt normal under my palm. Cold, damp with dew, no burn, no crushed blades. I took a torch and shone it in a circle, looking for footprints or melted grass. Nothing. The dog walked around in small circles and then lay down and watched me. He didn't whine, he didn't bark. He just watched. I told myself I'd sleep better knowing I'd seen it on video. That lasted about 2 hours. The next morning, I took the SD card to town to get it copied to a flash drive, and the attendant at the small tech shop said his system wouldn't read the file. Corrupt, he said. But the thumbnails look fine. He nudged the drive toward me, and I could see the same pale column in the tiny preview. He charged me $5 and said, "Weird thing. Probably a codec issue. Happens all the time when people use older cams." I tried not to read the late-night messages that the neighbors sent each other. Somebody asked if the raccoons were finally building a spaceship. Somebody else wrote a joke about crop circles. But there was a second voice in a private message from Rosa, the woman who runs the feed store down the road and knows about animal behavior. She said, "My Tom, your place quiet at night?" She'd noticed the chickens had been skittish and her barn cat had refused to go out for 3 nights. Heavy silence in her voice. We agreed to meet at mine after dusk and walk the perimeter. Rosa brought a second camera, one of those battery-powered game cams that shoots a sequence of high-res images. We set it to snap every 5 seconds and left it facing the compost again, a different angle so we could triangulate anything that appeared. We sat in the truck with the heat on and sat there for a long time, talking about nothing. The air smelled of diesel and stale coffee. At around 1:40 a.m., the truck radio fuzzed, but there was no signal, only a thin ringing in the speakers that felt like the end of a dial. Rosa swore softly and turned it off. The feed from the extra camera came back with 2 things. 1, a dozen photos of the column descending, like a ladder of light taking up the frames sequentially, perspectively consistent with the camera position. 2, the SD card's clock had somehow shifted during the sequence. The times stamped on Rosa's images were off by exactly 9 seconds between the start and the end of the column's appearance. I rubbed the back of my neck and told Rosa that this was the bit that got to me. Not just the thing itself, but the way time hopped around in logs and files, like a file had been edited by a hand that didn't care about our clocks. We took the cameras down the next morning and pored over the frames on my kitchen table. I printed a sheet and pinned them to the corkboard. The column's base blurred in the photos immediately below the point where it met the ground, but there was no evidence beneath it that anything had been there. No smudging on the compost lid, no displacement of soil. The frames, after it vanished minutes later, showed nothing different about the grass. If something had been on the ground, it had left no trace. Later that week, I put out the camera again on different posts. If it was animals, they'd show up everywhere. If it was whatever that column was, maybe it would come from another direction. The following morning, I found photos of the column again, but this time it appeared not over the compost, but beyond the wood line, between two trees where there's a hollow and the land slopes down toward the creek. The angle was wrong for any street lamp. There were no drone flights in the logs, and the neighbor across the fence swore he slept through the night and had not shown a beam in our direction. Every time the column showed up in the camera's frames, it behaved the same way, descending from the dark, touching or almost touching the ground, sometimes appearing to lean as if it were searching for something. Once it spread out at the base like a hand laid on sand, then narrowed and vanished. The camera files would be fine, then glitch, then come back with more frames. My email inbox filled with messages from people who had seen the images and wanted to know what we were doing about it. Some wanted to help. One guy from 2 towns over asked if he could mail me a thermal unit. I declined. It's been 3 weeks now. I left the latest camera up because I couldn't help myself. The dog follows me to the fence post and sits patient and fixed-eyed. The compost lid remains closed. The neighbors joke in a way that wants normal answers. I keep going out at dusk to stand where the camera stood and look up into the tree line and the patch of sky above it, waiting for any hint of movement that would make sense. Sometimes the yard is just a yard. Sometimes the feed shows a streak of light across the top edge, which I can explain as a plane or a meteor. Sometimes, and this is the thing that keeps my hands from steadying when I make coffee in the morning, the camera's SD card will load and the first 2 images will be blank, then the next 20 will have the column, one after the other, clean as a script. No footprints, no scorch, no sound. Just a record on plastic that says, in pixels, this happened. I've stopped leaving the compost lid open at night. I check the lock on the gate twice. The dog sleeps near the door. Friends ask if I'm thinking of calling someone official. But who do you call about a quiet column of light that descends without leaving a mark? The forest authorities would laugh me out of the office. The university people would want to put a suite of detectors up and ask me to sign waivers. I've done what I can. More cameras, different angles, backups of the files in triplet. The pattern repeats, and the questions don't get any better. Last night, the column showed up on a camera I'd left pointing at the creek mouth, where the ground falls away and water runs hidden under driftwood. On the images, it came down the same way, the lower frames catching a faint ripple along the surface of the water like a wake that was not made by something crossing above it. I stood there with Rosa at my side, both of us looking at the sequence on the laptop, and felt something like vertigo. The creek sounded normal outside the door, thin and steady. The dog paced and then lay down and watched the darkest tree. I don't know if I'm waiting for an answer or for the lights to stop showing up at all. All I know is what's in the files, and the files say the same thing over and over. A column of light descends from where there isn't any source visible, lingers as if assessing, and then folds away. It's a small, private glitch in my life that would be silly to fear if it didn't rearrange the quiet of the yard when it happens. I still put the camera up most nights, partly because I want to catch something that will explain it, and partly because I don't want it happening without me knowing where to look. If anything changes, I'll write it down. For now, I keep loading the SD cards, backing them up, and looking at the pale columns in sequence until the pixels blur together. I was driving home from the hospital that night, finishing my shift as a nurse. It was one of those late July nights in Iowa where the air sticks to your skin, even inside the car with the AC blasting. The sky was clear, a deep, saturated black, and the moon had already slipped behind some clouds. My route home takes me through a stretch of back roads between Cedar Falls and my apartment in Waterloo, 2 lanes winding through cornfields and the occasional farm. I've driven it 100 times alone at night, and it's never felt threatening, just quiet, familiar. I remember it started out normal. The radio was playing soft jazz low, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The headlights cut cleanly through the darkness, illuminating the corn that pressed close to the road. I passed the old red barn near the Jensen farm, its paint peeling, the silo dark against the horizon. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a car coming toward me, reflected in the distance. The headlights glinted on something metallic ahead, a quick flicker that caught my eye. I slowed a little, squinting, but there was no other vehicle. The road was empty. Nothing behind me in the mirrors. My pulse picked up slightly. I chalked it up to fatigue and the low adrenaline you get from driving alone at night. I kept going, my foot easing off the accelerator, and the reflection stayed there just ahead. I swear it wasn't just a single point of light either. It had depth, like the headlights were bouncing off an actual object. I tried to figure out if it was some farm equipment left out in a field, maybe the side of a tractor or a silvery roof of a grain bin catching my light. But everything along that stretch is dark at night. No farm equipment was supposed to be out there. As I got closer, the metallic gleam shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the angle of the reflection had changed. Not because I moved, I could tell. My headlights were steady, the car wasn't tilting. The reflection seemed to tilt on its own. It gave this odd impression like a mirror slowly turning away. I blinked, and it moved again, tilting farther. Then it started rising, not like a plane or helicopter, but almost smoothly, deliberately, straight up. I expected some kind of engine noise, some sound at all, but there was nothing. Absolute silence, except for my own tires on the asphalt. My stomach turned a little, and I felt a sudden awareness of how alone I was out there. I slowed even more, down to maybe 15 miles an hour, keeping my eyes locked on it. By the time I was directly underneath where I thought it had been, the reflection was gone. Not behind me, not ahead, not in the fields, just gone. I checked the mirrors frantically, scanning the sky, the corn, the road. Nothing. It was like it had disappeared entirely. I kept driving, heart still racing, trying to make sense of it. My brain kept testing explanations. A stray piece of tin in the field, a metallic sign, a trick of the headlights. But I know that stretch of road, there's nothing like that there. And it had moved, tilted, lifted, gone. Nothing stationary reflects like that. A few minutes later, I saw something else that made me slow again. The corn on the left side of the road had a shimmer to it, like wet metal. At first, I thought it was dew, or maybe the moon breaking through clouds for a second. But the shimmer moved slightly, just enough to look intentional. Not like wind, because the air was dead calm. I passed it slowly, staring straight ahead, and when I glanced in the side mirror, it was gone, like it had never been there. By the time I reached the intersection where the road meets the highway, I was gripping the wheel too tightly, my knuckles white. The lights of the town felt almost unreal after that stretch of black fields. Everything was normal again. Houses, street lamps, the occasional late-night jogger, but I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting the metallic sheen to return. I pulled into my apartment complex, parked, and sat for a long moment in the driver's seat, breathing, trying to process it. I thought maybe I'd imagined the reflection entirely, my brain playing tricks after a 12-hour shift, but I can't explain the way it tilted, the smoothness of its rise, the complete silence. Not a plane, not a drone, not a bird. Nothing I've ever seen behaves like that. I went inside, left the lights on in my apartment, and kept thinking about it as I showered. My phone buzzed with some work texts, and I checked them, but my mind kept drifting back to the road, to that metallic gleam, tilting, rising. The next morning, I drove that same route again, in daylight. Everything looked the same as usual: the old barn, the cornfields, the gravel edges of the road, nothing out of place, no metallic sheen anywhere, no trace of the movement I saw. Tried to explain it to my friend Nate that evening when we had a drink, but he just laughed it off. Probably a trick of your lights, he said, but it didn't feel like a trick. I don't think I've ever noticed headlights reflecting off anything in the same way before. I haven't taken that back road at night since. I stick to the highway now, lights overhead, other cars around, but sometimes when I'm driving late and the moon is out, I catch a flash in the corner of my eye, a glint in the fields, and I instinctively slow down. Half of me wants to look, the other half wants to keep driving straight. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it. And I can't make myself forget the way it moved, smooth and deliberate, rising into the sky without a sound. Even now, when I drive by that stretch during the day, my stomach tightens for a moment, waiting, just in case it decides to show itself again. It was just after midnight when I left work that night. I'd stayed late to close up the small accounting office where I worked in Petaluma. It was mid-October, clear and cool, and the air had that damp chill that hangs around near the coast. The drive home to Sebastopol usually took about 20 minutes if the roads were empty, and that night they were. I remember thinking how dark it felt. No moon, no wind, just the sound of my tires and the hum of the old Honda. I took the back roads like I always did, cutting through the open farmland instead of sticking to the highway. It's faster that way and usually peaceful. There aren't many streetlights out there, so the stars were bright, or they should have been. For the first few miles, I could barely see them. I thought maybe the humidity had made the air hazy. About 5 minutes outside of town, I noticed 3 white lights above the field to my left. They were spaced perfectly apart and forming a triangle. I assumed it was a plane at first. The Sonoma County Airport isn't far. But the lights weren't flashing. They were steady, soft white, not bright like landing lights. I slowed a little, leaning forward over the steering wheel. The lights weren't moving like a plane either. They were just gliding, completely silent. The shape didn't turn or tilt. It just kept the same orientation, moving parallel to the road like it was pacing me. I rolled down my window to listen, expecting the distant hum of engines. Nothing. Just the faint sound of crickets and the wind rushing past the car. For maybe 30 seconds, I told myself it was a drone. A big one, maybe some kind of survey equipment. But the lights were too far apart for that, easily wider than a small plane's wingspan. And the way it moved didn't look mechanical. It was smooth in a way that made my stomach tighten. I slowed down to about 30, keeping my eyes on it. The triangle held perfectly steady above the field, maybe 100 feet up. No blinking lights, no change in color, no sound. Then it turned, not like a plane banking or a helicopter pivoting. The whole shape rotated in place, flat, so the point that had been leading suddenly shifted 90 degrees. The lights stayed in perfect formation the whole time. It was like watching a compass needle rotate, slow and deliberate. I don't know why, but I pulled over. I think I wanted to see it without the motion of the car. I stopped by the side of the road and turned off the engine. The night went dead quiet. No frogs, no insects, no wind. I could hear my own breathing. The lights stopped rotating and hovered there. I sat for a second, just staring, then reached for my phone. The screen glared too bright in the dark, and by the time I got the camera app open, the lights had started to move again. This time, they tilted backward, like the whole shape was angling upward. I hit record and aimed the phone out the driver's side window, trying to keep the lights in frame. They tilted higher, slower, and then, without warning, shot straight up. Not fast like a rocket, but impossibly smooth. No acceleration, no sound. 1 second they were there, the next they were higher, smaller, and then gone. The stars behind them looked normal again, like nothing had been there. I just sat there for a while, the phone still recording the empty sky. My heart was pounding, and I felt that weird tightness in my chest that comes from holding your breath too long. I didn't even realize until later that the recording didn't save. The app crashed, and when I reopened it, the last clip was from earlier that afternoon. I started the car again and got back on the road. For the next mile or so, I kept looking up through the windshield, half expecting the lights to come back. The radio, which had been off, suddenly turned on by itself. Static, no station. I reached to turn it off, but before I touched the knob, the static faded into silence again. The road dipped into a grove of eucalyptus trees, and when I came out the other side, my dashboard clock read 12:58. It had been 12:32 when I pulled over. I don't remember sitting that long. I hadn't even turned the car off for more than a minute or two. I was sure of it. I checked my phone clock. It said 12:40. That mismatch sat in my head the rest of the drive home. I told myself the car clock must have been wrong. Maybe it reset when the radio glitched. But I'd looked at it before leaving work, and it was right then. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a while with the lights off. My street was quiet. A few porch lights on, one cat crossing the road. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the sky again. Everything looked normal. Stars, faint glow from town in the distance. No noise, no movement. I checked the car clock again before going inside. 1:03. My phone said 12:46. I didn't tell anyone right away. The next morning I went to work like usual, but the memory of it sat in my head like something unfinished. When I got home that night, I checked the dash clock again. It was still 17 minutes fast. I asked my coworker, Jared, if he'd ever seen strange lights around that area. He said sometimes you see helicopters from the Coast Guard or private planes coming in low, but I didn't mention how the lights moved. Later that week, I drove that same stretch again. Same time, same road. Nothing. Just stars and the dark shape of fields. No fog, no clouds. I even parked in the same place for a few minutes, but it was silent and empty. I tried not to think about it too much after that, but sometimes I catch myself replaying how the lights moved. The rotation, the tilt, the way they lifted. It didn't look like flight. It looked like something changing direction in a way it shouldn't be able to. The clock in my car never went back to normal. I eventually had the battery replaced, and that fixed it, but before that, it kept that exact 17-minute difference. One night, a couple weeks later, I was driving home from dinner around the same time, and I saw a plane passing overhead. Just a normal small aircraft with blinking red and white lights. It should have looked ordinary, but watching it made me tense up. For a second, I thought it was slowing down midair like before, but it wasn't. It was just my eyes waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. That's the thing that stayed with me the most. Not fear exactly, but that feeling of waiting. Like part of me expects to see those three lights again every time I look up at the sky. It was early October when I hiked out to the cliffs near Montauk Point. The weather had just turned cool, and the air off the Atlantic had that heavy, wet bite that sticks to your clothes. I'd gone out there on a Friday afternoon after work. I'm a surveyor for Suffolk County, and figured I'd walk the coastal trail for an hour or so before sunset. I'd been having trouble sleeping, and being near the water always helped. By the time I parked near the old radar tower and started down the trail, the fog was already rolling in from the ocean. The sky was gray but still light, maybe an hour from dusk. I was the only car in the gravel lot. Even the fishermen who usually hang around that area were gone. The cliffs there aren't huge, 30, 40 feet above the water, but the drop looks worse when the tide's rough. The surf was loud that day, echoing up from below, and I could smell the salt and seaweed thick in the air. I remember thinking it felt like rain, but it never came. I walked east for maybe half a mile until the trail got narrow and overgrown. The fog started to thicken, so I stopped near a section of rock that jutted out toward the ocean. There's an old wooden fence there, half rotted and leaning, meant to keep people from getting too close to the edge. I climbed over it anyway and sat down on a flat rock facing the water. For a while, it was just the sound of waves and the faint creak of wind through the grass behind me. The visibility dropped fast. Within 10 minutes, the ocean below was just a moving sheet of white. You could barely tell where the water ended and the fog began. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was the reflection of a boat. It was faint, a soft orange-white glow deep in the mist, maybe a few hundred yards out from the cliff base. I figured it was some fishing trawler heading toward the point, its lights diffused by the fog. I didn't think much of it, but it wasn't moving like a boat. It wasn't swaying or bobbing with the waves, it was just still. I squinted, trying to focus through the mist, and after a few seconds I realized it wasn't sitting on the water either. It was hovering just above it. Not high, maybe 10 or 20 feet, but enough that I could see the faint shimmer of the ocean underneath. It didn't have a clear shape, not at first. The glow seemed to pulse a little, not flashing or strobing, just slowly brightening and dimming, like someone breathing. There was no sound, no engine, no chop of a propeller, nothing. The waves were crashing hard below, but the light didn't move with them. It was fixed in place. I took out my phone to try and record it, but the screen immediately fogged up. I wiped it off with my sleeve, but the moisture in the air was so thick it kept misting over. I managed to get the camera open, but when I pointed it toward the ocean, the lens couldn't focus. The glow was there, but faint, like a distant streetlight behind heavy fog. I thought maybe I'd adjust the zoom, but before I could, something about the light changed. It stretched. It didn't rise or fall, it just elongated vertically, like it was drawing itself upward out of the water. It got taller, thinner, and brighter until it was this column of light, still hazy, but definitely solid in shape. Then, almost instantly, it condensed back down into a sphere, about the size of a small car. I stood up then, phone forgotten in my hand. I don't know why, but I felt this strange pressure in my ears, the way you do in an airplane before it equalizes. It wasn't painful, just noticeable. The air felt heavier. The glow shifted again, a soft red, then back to white. And then it started to move. Slowly, silently, it began gliding closer toward the cliffs. It didn't come fast or aggressively, more like it was drifting. I could see it more clearly now, cutting through the fog in this eerie, smooth motion. No flicker, no sway. When it got maybe 50 yards from the shore, it stopped again, hovering perfectly still. I remember looking down at my feet, trying to steady myself, and realizing I couldn't hear the waves anymore. The wind was still blowing against my jacket, but the sound of the ocean was gone. Completely gone. It was just this strange, soft hum in the air, low enough that I wasn't sure if it was real or just inside my head. I called out, "Hey, hello," because part of me still thought it might be some drone or Coast Guard tech I hadn't heard about. No response. The light didn't move, didn't react. Then it rotated. That's the only word I can think of. The sphere turned like it had a front and a back, though I couldn't tell any difference in the glow. It was a smooth, deliberate motion, and then this part stuck with me. It tilted slightly downward, like it was looking right at me. I froze. The hum got louder for maybe 3 seconds, just enough that I could feel it in my chest, and then it stopped completely. No sound, no movement. I don't know how long we sat like that. Me on the cliff, it hovering out over the water. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. My sense of time kind of fell apart. Then, without warning, it shot straight upward. Not fast like a flare or a plane. Instant. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, disappearing into the clouds above. There was no contrail, no ripple in the air, no echo. The fog just closed back in like nothing had ever been there. The sound of the ocean came back slowly after that. I realized I was shaking and that my phone was still in my hand. I looked at the time, 6:43 p.m. I checked it against the timestamp on the photo I'd taken just before the light stretched, and it said 6:25. 18 minutes, though it hadn't felt that long. When I finally got back to the parking lot, my car windows were beaded with condensation. I sat there for a while, trying to warm my hands and figure out what I'd seen. I called my friend Danny, who works at the marina in Amagansett, and asked if there'd been any boats out that night with strong deck lights. He said no one was out there. Conditions were too foggy, and the Coast Guard had advised against it. I didn't tell him exactly what I saw, just that I'd seen a light. When I got home later, I checked the photo. It's nothing, just a gray blur with a faint amber tint in the middle. Could be anything. The video didn't save right, it just froze a few seconds in, audio cutting out halfway through. For a few nights after that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I drove near the water or saw fog rolling in, I'd catch myself scanning the horizon for that glow again. Nothing. A week later, I went back out there around the same time of day. It was clear that evening. Calm water, orange sunset, perfect visibility. I stood in the same spot by the fence and looked out over the ocean. Just wind, waves, and gulls. No hum, no glow. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something odd in the dirt near the fence post. Three small impressions in the soil, round, maybe an inch deep, spaced evenly apart like the points of a triangle. Could have been from anything. I crouched to look closer, but the dirt was too dry to tell how old they were. When I looked back out at the horizon, the sun had dropped behind a thin layer of haze. For a second, the reflection on the water shimmered in the same way that light had, slow, pulsing. I stood there until it faded completely, then started walking back toward the car, not looking over my shoulder again. I haven't gone back to Montauk since, but every so often, when I'm driving home late along the Sunrise Highway and the fog comes in from the coast, I'll catch a faint, soft glow over the water in my side mirror. It's probably just the lighthouse or a plane's landing light catching the mist. Probably. It was late November, a cold, damp kind of night where everything smells faintly of wet tarmac and chimney smoke. My girlfriend at the time, Claire, had just moved into a small terrace house near the outskirts of Dundee. I'd been helping her unpack boxes all evening, and by the time we finished, it was after midnight. Her street was one of those short residential ones with a dead end, old brick houses, narrow pavements, and a single orange streetlight at the corner. We stepped outside to get some air and smoke before heading to bed. It was strangely quiet. Usually you'd hear at least a distant car on the main road or a dog barking, but it was just still. Claire lit her cigarette and nudged me to look up. Over the rooftops, not far above, there was a shape, triangular, perfectly still, no sound. 3 points of white light marked its corners, with a faint red glow in the middle. It wasn't huge, but it was close enough that we could make out the edges, darker than the night sky. The whole thing just hung there, motionless. We whispered to each other without really thinking about why we were whispering. Claire fumbled for her phone, but by the time she unlocked it, the screen stayed black, like the camera wouldn't pick it up. She tried twice, then gave up. As we watched, the red glow at the center pulsed once, then the corner lights blinked. 1, 2, 3, each in turn, like running lights on a stage. It did that twice, then everything went dark. There was no movement when it disappeared, no sudden speed or upward climb. It just wasn't there anymore. We stood there for a while, shivering, staring at the empty sky. Eventually, Claire muttered, "Let's just go inside." Neither of us slept properly that night. We didn't tell anyone, not her neighbors, not our families. We didn't even talk about it much between ourselves after that first night. A week later, we were at the bus stop down by the high street. It was early evening, maybe 6, already dark. It had been drizzling, and the pavement was slick under the streetlights. The stop was empty, except for us. That's when the man walked up. He came from the opposite direction of the main road, hands in the pockets of a black overcoat. Underneath, you could see the edge of a black suit, white shirt, black tie. He wasn't wearing a hat or gloves, even though it was cold. His hair was neatly parted, and he was clean-shaven. He didn't say hello or ask for the time. He stopped a few feet away, looked directly at us, first at Claire, then at me, and asked, very clearly, "Did the lights blink in sequence?" It took me a second to realize what he'd said. Claire blinked at him and opened her mouth, but before she could answer, he turned and walked away. Not quickly, not nervously, just turned and strolled back the way he'd come, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement. He didn't look back. We sat there frozen for a few seconds. The bus came and went without us getting on. When we finally spoke, all Claire said was, "How did he know?" After that, little things started to bother us. One evening, I was leaving Claire's and saw a black car parked at the end of her street. Engine off, windows tinted. The driver's silhouette was barely visible. When I walked toward it, the car started and rolled away slowly, not speeding, just moving off like it had been waiting for something. Claire said her landline rang twice late at night that week, but when she picked up, nobody was there. She thought she heard faint clicking on the other end, like an old tape recorder. Another night, I woke up on her sofa and saw light through the curtains, white, bright, but no sound of an engine. By the time I pulled the curtain back, the street was empty. We never saw the triangular craft again. We didn't see the man again either, not directly. But once, standing at the same bus stop a couple of weeks later, I noticed a tall figure at the far end of the street under a lamp. Black coat, hands in pockets, not moving. When a bus went past and blocked my view for a second, he was gone. I tried to reason it out. Maybe it was some new kind of drone. Maybe the man had overheard us talking somewhere. But it didn't add up. We'd been completely alone when we saw the craft. We hadn't told a soul. The only people who knew were me and Claire, and she swore she hadn't mentioned it to anyone. By January, she moved again, closer to the city center. The car stopped showing up after that. The phone calls stopped too. We never got an explanation for any of it. But whenever I wait for a bus at night now, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting a man in a black suit to ask me another question I won't know how to answer. I heard the door chime at exactly 11:02 p.m., but when I looked up from the counter, I saw no one walking in, just the empty double doors and the dull hum of the neon open sign. I glanced at the clock behind me, 11:02, and then back out the front window. A black sedan sat under the lone street lamp, headlights off, engine idling so quietly I barely heard it over the air conditioner. I was 7 hours into my night shift at Green's 24-hour mini-mart, and I'd never seen that car before. I folded my arms and pretended not to notice. The clerk before me said, "Can I help you?" But he was wrong place, wrong time. The sedan stayed there, broad at the shoulders and low to the ground, like someone had rubbed polish over the entire body. In overnights, you get ghosts, drunk drivers, college kids looking for snacks, but almost never someone who just sits there for hours. By midnight, I'd rung up exactly 12 customers, a mix of kids buying Red Bulls and one guy buying dog biscuits at 3 a.m., and the sedan never moved. I counted how many cigarettes I'd sold. 35. I refilled the snack rack and gazed out the window. No lights moved in the lot except for the single filament bulb overhead, ticking like a slow clock. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Even Scout, the store cat, hunkered down behind the chips aisle, tail wrapped around her paws. At 1:17, my soda cooler buzzed and flickered off for 2 seconds. The power surge was small, enough that my fluorescent lights dimmed, but the coffee machine kept running. That convinced me it wasn't the whole block, just the store's wiring. I muttered to myself and went to reset the breaker in the back room. When I opened the fuse box, the breaker for aisle 3 had tripped. I flipped it back and watched the lights return. Back at the counter, I considered calling my manager, but figured I'd mention it tomorrow. At 2:45, a drip started in the ceiling by the back door. Water, cold and clear, landing in a small puddle on the concrete floor. I grabbed a mop and bucket, found the leak right under the air duct. I inspected the duct. No condensation, no dropped pipe. The drip slowed after 5 minutes, then stopped. I emptied the bucket outside. The lot was empty, the sedan gone. I figured maybe the driver stopped nodding off. The air smelled musty now, like wet carpet. I circled back inside. Scout rushed out from under the counter, rubbing my leg. The drip hadn't woken anyone. I checked the restrooms, dry. I shrugged and grabbed a coffee. By 3:30, the store was quiet again. The bug zapper over the door sizzled twice. A chill cut through the store even though the AC was set on cool. I shivered and pulled my hoodie tighter. That's when I noticed the sedan rolling forward 3 feet. No driver's silhouette in the window. The passenger door opened, but no one stepped out. The door closed on its own and the car rolled back, unchanged, as if on invisible tracks. That was enough. I walked to the front doors, aimed my flashlight at the vehicle. No one inside. No movement. The engine was off now, and the thick tires blocked any sound of it starting again. I went back to the counter, rubbed my eyes, and stared at the security monitors. None of the cameras covered the parking lot well. The angle missed the driver's seat. I hit the view back lot button, tried to pan the camera, but the feed cut to static, then returned to normal after 4 seconds. The only thing frozen in pixelated gray was the front of the black sedan. I stared at the screen until the static cleared. The car remained unchanged. I pressed the record button. The feed continued, no glitches. By 4:50, I'd had one more customer, a young woman buying trail mix. She stared at me, then at the lot, and said, "Is something out there?" I said no, just an old car. She nodded and left. When the doors closed, I checked again. The sedan's roof was empty. I clocked over to the break room at 5:30 and opened the refrigerator. My sandwich was gone. I'd left turkey and cheese, but someone else had taken it. No note, no wrapper in the wastebasket. Just empty plastic. I thought maybe the night janitor had come in early, but I hadn't heard anyone. My shift ended at 6 a.m. The sky was already staining gray. I counted down the minutes, ringing up 2 more people who paid cash for lottery tickets and beef jerky. At 6:02, I hit the button to open the doors. The chime sounded, and I grabbed my jacket. I walked out to the lot, expecting the sedan to still sit there, mocking me. But the lot was empty. No car, no footprints in the gravel, no oil spots. I checked the side door exit. It was locked and no one had tried to pry it. My phone buzzed. A text from the manager saying, "Leave the key under the mat tonight. Maintenance at 10. I hadn't told her the fridge thing, hadn't mentioned the car, nothing. I answered, "Got it." I walked to my car, keys in hand, and stopped. A black SUV sat idling in front of the convenience store across the road. A man in a black suit sat in the driver's seat, jacket buttoned, tie narrow, hands flat on the wheel. He stared at me without blinking. My pulse spiked. I raised a hand in greeting. He opened his door and stepped onto the street without a sound. I walked closer, keeping my jacket zipped. The morning was cool under my breath. He said, "You won't remember this conversation." His voice was low but clear. He reached into his jacket pocket and pressed a small card into my palm. I saw the edges, white, blank, and in the corner a single line of type, "Do not recall." I blinked. He stepped back, got into the SUV, and drove away without headlights, tires rolling silent on asphalt. I stood there holding the card. When I looked down, the text was gone. My hand was empty. I glanced across the road. The store's doors were closed, lights still on inside. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. I was out running near the San Marcos River just before dawn. Name's Daniel Morales, and I've been living around here for most of my life, born and raised not too far from the riverbanks. Running's always been my go-to for clearing my head, especially early mornings when the world's still quiet and the city feels like it's holding its breath before waking up. That morning, I left the house around 5:30. The sky was still that deep, heavy blue you get before sunrise, and the air had that cool edge that means the heat's gonna come on strong by noon. I'd planned a usual route, a loop that follows the river trail, cuts through some woods, then back around the downtown area. Nothing fancy. The first couple miles were the same as always. My feet hit the cracked pavement steady, my breath coming out in little puffs. The trail wasn't busy, just a couple of other early risers and a few dogs being walked. I was halfway through when I hit this small clearing I hadn't really paid attention to before. It's not a big deal, just a spot where the trees thin out a bit, and you get this open patch with grass and a few scattered rocks, kind of tucked away from the rest of the trail. As soon as I stepped into that clearing, something felt off. The air got thick all of a sudden, like somebody turned the humidity way up. But that wasn't it. It felt colder too, which made no sense with the humidity. My skin prickled, the kind of feeling when you walk into a room and know something's just not right but can't say why. I slowed down and my breath came out slower, fogging in front of me. I glanced at my smartwatch without stopping, and that's when I noticed the weird part. The screen lit up, but the timer jumped ahead by almost 12 minutes. Just like that. 1 second I was at 6:01, and the next it read 6:13. I stopped running right there. My heart started pounding, but not like I was scared, more like I was confused. I looked around the clearing, trying to find something, anything, that would explain how 12 minutes just disappeared. There was nothing. The trail continued on the other side, the trees swaying lightly, a bird or two waking up in the distance, but nothing to explain the jump in time. I had no memory of stopping, no memory of anything between the two times. I rubbed my wrist, hoping maybe my watch was glitching out. I tapped the screen a few times, checked the battery, checked the settings. Everything looked fine. It wasn't like the battery had died or the watch had reset. It was just missing 12 minutes from the clock. That's when I noticed something else. The clearing was silent. Dead silent. Usually around this time you get at least a few birds chirping or the rustle of leaves from a breeze, but the air was completely still, like someone pressed mute on the whole place. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was tired or my brain was playing tricks on me. I started running again, but my legs felt heavy, like I was wading through water. About 100 yards down the path, I caught sight of movement out of the corner of my eye, something shifting between the trees. I turned my head fast, but whatever it was melted away before I could get a good look. That feeling came back, like I was being watched. I scanned the woods, but all I saw were trees and shadows. Nothing that made sense. I kept running, my steps quickening without me really meaning to. When I finally made it back to my street, the sun was just breaking the horizon, painting the sky pink and orange. I stopped and checked my watch again. The time matched the sunrise, but I still had this gnawing feeling that something wasn't right, like the world had tilted just a little and I'd slipped through a crack. I thought about calling someone, but what would I say? Hey, 12 minutes just vanished when I was running? It sounded crazy even to me. That day, I couldn't focus. I kept catching myself staring at my wrist or looking toward the trees near that clearing. When night came, I stayed inside, doors locked, windows shut tight. I told myself it was just a weird glitch, or maybe I zoned out without realizing it. But every time I go back running, I avoid that clearing. The last thing I want is to lose more time I can't explain, or to see whatever it was that moved in the trees that morning. I'm not sure what I ran into that day. Maybe it was nothing but a trick of the mind. Still, it's the kind of thing that sticks with you, like a shadow on your shoulder you can't quite shake off. I had been driving the back roads near Waverly all evening, dropping off packages in the scattered farmhouses and trailers that lined the county roads. It was late October, the kind of night where the air is sharp but dry, and the fields stretch out flat with nothing but stubble from the harvest catching the headlights. I was alone in the truck, the heater humming quietly, and I was starting to think about pulling over somewhere for a quick sandwich before the last stop. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a reflection off the low clouds. The way the truck's lights hit a wet patch on the road or the edge of a pond sometimes makes the sky glow weird. But it wasn't moving. Not like headlights reflecting on clouds or fog or anything I'd ever seen. It was a faint circular glow just above the horizon, off to the right. My truck's headlights swept across it, and it held steady like it was ignoring everything around it. I slowed, trying to figure out if it was something on the ground, a barn window maybe, or some farm equipment left out. But the light didn't match anything. It wasn't flickering like a lantern or bouncing the way a tractor's lights do. It hovered in place, almost perfectly still, and as I moved closer, it didn't change in size. My first thought was, I must be seeing things, but the more I watched, the more my stomach tightened. I tapped the brakes, rolling down the window for some fresh air, the cool wind rushing in, carrying the smell of damp leaves and dirt. It was silent, completely silent, except for the truck engine. I craned my neck, trying to see it better, and that's when I noticed a faint shimmer around the edges, like heat waves rising off asphalt in summer, but cold and steady. I shook my head, thinking maybe it was the fog bank I'd passed earlier, but there was no fog here, just clear night. I floored it a little, trying to close the distance, figuring if it was a reflection it would move, or if it was on the ground it would get bigger as I approached. But it didn't. It stayed exactly where it was, the reflection of my lights cutting across it fixed. I eased back, slowing down, gripping the wheel tight. For a moment, I considered stopping completely, but my eyes didn't leave it. There was a subtle pulse to the light, not flashing, just breathing, almost imperceptibly. I switched on the high beams. The reflection brightened slightly, almost like it was feeding off the light. That made my chest tighten, and I felt my pulse spike. I've driven these roads 1,000 times, alone at night, and I've seen deer, stray headlights, the occasional firefly swarm in August, but nothing that stayed with me like this. Nothing that held my lights and seemed indifferent to the world. I tried calling my dispatcher, thinking maybe it was some other driver or construction crew parked off the road, but my phone was patchy. Weak signal, and the call dropped before I could finish explaining. I gritted my teeth, muttering under my breath, Okay, just a barn. It's a barn. But the shape didn't match any building. The glow was smooth and round, edges soft, hovering in the air. I could see a faint shadow beneath it, but it didn't touch the ground. I tapped the brakes again, moving slowly. As I got closer, I caught a glimpse of the surrounding fields in the truck's headlights. Everything was still and empty. No animals, no fences, no equipment, just black soil and low stubble. And the glow, still hovering, still exactly where it had been. I tried looking away, scanning the tree line, the road, the ditch, but my eyes kept drifting back. There was something about it that felt deliberate, like it was aware I was watching. At one point, I flicked on the radio. Static. Nothing but static, even when I tried different stations. My mind started racing. Maybe power lines, maybe some weird atmospheric reflection, but nothing fit. The glow didn't jitter, didn't flicker like electricity, didn't hum like a transformer. Just hung there. I thought about turning around, driving the opposite direction, seeing if it would move with me. I eased the truck into reverse, heart thumping. The reflection stayed in place. I drove forward again, still there. I tapped the brakes lightly, trying to gauge its distance. It didn't shift. It didn't react. It just hovered, fixed and faint like a painted light on the horizon. I tried to make sense of it logically. Maybe I'd lost track of time. Maybe fatigue was playing tricks on me. But I hadn't. My eyes were sharp, my mind alert. I could track the road, the ditches, the trees. Everything else looked normal, mundane. But the light didn't fit. It was an intrusion into the night, and I couldn't figure out its purpose. Eventually, I made the last turn toward the delivery point. The road curved slightly, and I expected the glow to vanish behind the ridge, but it didn't. Instead, it remained fixed, now partially obscured by a cluster of trees. I slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel, scanning the edge of the horizon. My headlights stretched across the fields again. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. It didn't vanish, didn't blink out, didn't float higher or lower. Just stayed. I parked near the delivery house, engine running, lights off, trying to calm myself. From here, the glow was just a pale, unmoving dot on the horizon. I stepped out, the cold air biting my cheeks, and walked to the back of the truck, checking for any signs of people, animals, machinery. Nothing. Quiet. The only sound was the wind rustling the bare corn stalks in the field. I decided to finish my deliveries quickly and get back on the main road. As I drove away, the glow eventually sank behind a low rise in the fields, but not naturally. It faded slowly, almost reluctant to leave, lingering in the corner of my vision for several minutes. My headlights swept over the horizon repeatedly, but it was gone. On the way home, I kept glancing in the rear view, expecting it to reappear, maybe hovering over the road behind me, but the horizon remained empty. Traffic was non-existent. The night was normal otherwise. My radio worked again. My phone got a signal. Everything returned to normal, except for that lingering sense of being observed, a pressure in the air I couldn't explain. When I got home, I parked in the garage and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out toward the dark fields. The moon was up, illuminating the bare soil, and nothing moved. I went inside, tried to shake it off, but the image of that glow stayed in my mind. Fixed, unblinking, and absolutely unmoving, like it existed on its own terms. Even now, when I think about it, I wonder if it was a trick of light, some rare atmospheric phenomenon, or something else entirely. I drove the same route the next day, and nothing happened. Nothing. But sometimes when I drive those back roads alone at night, I swear I see a faint glow just over the horizon, and I instinctively slow down, half expecting it to still be there, waiting. I woke up in a hospital room with no idea how I got there. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed quietly, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. My head throbbed, and everything felt sluggish, like I'd been underwater for days. Nurses were moving in and out, but no one said much, just the usual check-ins and questions. When I tried to speak, my throat was dry and my voice came out hoarse. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:17 a.m. I tried to piece together what happened, but nothing came. The last thing I remembered was waking up on my couch Saturday morning, watching the news. After that, a total blank. A doctor came in, kind enough, but clearly as confused as I was. She said I'd been found wandering on a nearby hiking trail 3 days ago, disoriented and dehydrated. They admitted me for observation. When I asked if anyone had reported me missing, she said no. I pressed her about what happened during those 3 days, but she just shook her head. No clue. Then I noticed something on my left forearm. A cluster of tiny scars, perfectly round, about the size of pinpricks, arranged in a tight circle. I didn't remember getting them. They weren't bleeding and there was no swelling, but they looked fresh enough, not more than a week old. I showed the nurse and she examined them carefully. "That's strange," she said quietly. "No idea what could cause marks like this. No burns, no insect bites, no signs of an allergic reaction. We're going to run some tests." I tried to think back to the weekend, to when I might have gotten them. But my mind was like a wall, blank and silent. Later, a friend came by, Mark, a buddy from work. I told him what happened, showed him the scars. He looked concerned but didn't say much except to ask if I was feeling okay. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital running tests. Blood work came back normal, no signs of infection or toxins. The scars didn't match anything the doctors had seen before. I kept asking about cameras or witnesses on the trail, but no one had seen me. No cameras caught me either. It was like I disappeared off the map for those 3 days. On the third day, I was discharged. I went home, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. The scars itched occasionally, a dull, prickling sensation underneath, like something was just beneath the surface. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept waking up, sweating even though my room was cold. When I finally did drift off, I had strange dreams, a soft humming noise, lights moving across the sky, shapes that didn't quite make sense. Over the next week, I kept examining those scars. They didn't heal the way normal wounds did. Instead, they almost looked like they were embedded deeper into the skin, like a stamp that couldn't be washed off. One evening, I was looking at them under the bathroom light when the itching got worse, sharper. I felt a weird buzzing, almost like electricity, around my arm. I caught a faint glow coming from the marks, just for a second, and I swear I saw tiny lines of light pulsing beneath my skin. I rubbed my arm, thinking maybe I was imagining things, but the sensation stayed. I kept feeling like I was being watched, even at home. A few days later, I went back to the trail where I was found. It was early morning, fog rolling through the trees, and everything was damp and quiet. I walked the path slowly, trying to find any clue, something I might have missed before. I found a small clearing, surrounded by old pine trees. The ground was strange there. Patches of dead grass and some rocks that looked like they'd been moved recently. In the center, the earth was oddly smooth, as if something had pressed down hard and left an imprint. I crouched down and saw faint marks in the dirt, long, thin, like claw scratches, but too even to be natural. I ran my fingers over them, feeling cold despite the morning chill. Suddenly, the hairs on my neck stood up. A low humming sound filled the air, soft but unmistakable. It felt like the air itself was vibrating. I stood up fast, looking around. No one else was there, just the trees swaying and the fog thickening. I turned to leave, but noticed something glinting near a tree root. I picked it up, a small metallic object, smooth and cold. It wasn't like any metal I'd handled before. It was light but heavy at the same time, with a strange warmth under my skin when I held it. I put it in my pocket and left the clearing quickly. The humming stopped as soon as I stepped back onto the trail. At home, I examined the object under a magnifying glass. It was perfectly round, no visible seams or markings, like it was crafted with precision beyond anything I'd seen. That night, the buzzing returned, stronger this time, and the scars on my arm pulsed with a faint blue glow. I couldn't sleep, kept watching my arm as the light seemed to shift just beneath the surface. The next morning, the scars looked a little different. The circle had expanded, and I could swear the marks were rearranging themselves. Like they were alive, moving in patterns I couldn't understand. I called the hospital again, desperate for answers, but they told me to come in for another checkup. When I got there, the doctors took one look and were just as baffled. They ran more scans, but nothing showed up on the x-rays or ultrasounds. No foreign objects, no injuries below the skin. The scars didn't hurt, but they felt invasive, like a silent presence embedded in me. I asked if anyone else had ever had something like this. One nurse hesitated and mentioned an old case about unexplained skin markings on hikers, but couldn't say more. I left the hospital feeling more unsettled than ever. Back at home, the object I found started to hum softly when I was near it. It felt like it was responding to me, like it was connected to those scars. I tried to throw it away once, but found it back on my nightstand the next morning. No idea how it got there. In the weeks that followed, the buzzing and glowing became part of my daily life. I avoided mirrors because sometimes in the corner of my vision, I'd catch glimpses of shapes moving, not people, more like shadows shifting in impossible ways. I stopped telling people about it. Friends noticed I was distracted, maybe anxious. I wasn't sure how to explain what was happening. One night, I woke suddenly, feeling like I was falling. The room was spinning slowly, and that humming sound filled my ears, loud and insistent. I looked down at my arm, and the scars were shining brightly now, pulsing in rhythm with the buzzing. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, like a veil being pulled back. I closed my eyes, waiting. Then it stopped. The light faded, the buzzing ceased, and I was left in silence. After that night, the scars slowly faded over a few days, the glow disappearing entirely. The humming went silent. The object stopped responding. I kept the object, though, locked in a box. I don't know what it is or where it came from, and I still don't remember those missing 3 days. But sometimes when I'm alone and quiet, I swear I can hear that humming again, faint, distant, like a signal reaching out from somewhere beyond. I was out in the middle of nowhere, south of Gainesville, Texas, mapping sinkholes for the state geology department. It was late September, dry and warm during the day, but the nights got cool. The pasture where I was working was huge, barely a fence line in sight, just miles of grass and scrub dotted with little hollows and depressions. Mostly harmless stuff, but some of these sinkholes could collapse suddenly, so part of my job was to document them and warn landowners. I'd been out there for a few days, driving my pickup along dirt trails and marking GPS points whenever I found something new. One afternoon, I came across a hole that looked a little different. It wasn't very big, maybe 10 feet across, but the grass right around it was thinner, and the edges looked oddly smooth, almost polished. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and I crouched down to inspect it. That's when I noticed the faint humming. It was low and constant, not something you'd expect from a sinkhole. I sat on the ground, quiet, trying to pick it apart from the background noise, bugs, wind through the grass, but it was definitely coming from the hole itself. The hum wasn't loud, more like a vibration you felt through the soles of your boots. I pulled out my phone to record it. The audio was weak, but you could hear a steady drone in the background. I was curious, but figured it might be some natural gas or something like that. I took measurements, snapped some photos, and marked it on my map. I planned to call it in to my supervisor when I got back to town. That night, I camped near the pasture's edge. I had my old tent, a camp stove, and a cooler with some food. The sky was clear, and the stars were sharp. The kind of night that feels quiet but heavy, you know? I sat outside the tent, trying to listen for that hum again. It was subtle, but it was definitely there, deeper and more persistent in the dark. At around midnight, I thought I heard something else, a faint crunch of tires on dirt. I froze and looked out toward the pasture. The moon was just a sliver, but enough to make out shapes. I saw 2 ATV-sized vehicles creeping through the grass, their headlights off, moving slowly and deliberately toward the sinkhole. I wanted to call out or flash my lantern, but something stopped me. The air felt tense, like I wasn't supposed to be there. The 2 vehicles stopped a few feet from the hole. 2 men stepped out, both wearing black from head to toe. They looked like security guys, or maybe some kind of federal agents, but there was nothing official about their clothes, no badges or insignia, just plain black suits and hats. They moved with purpose, scanning the area around the hole. I ducked behind a tree and watched. They pulled out some small devices. Nothing I recognized, just black boxes with blinking lights and buttons, and started scanning the ground around the depression. After a few minutes, one of them knelt down and put his hand near the edge of the hole. The humming seemed to get stronger for a moment, then it stopped entirely. It was like the hole went dead. The 2 men stood up, exchanged a few words quietly, and then one of them said something I couldn't quite hear. The other nodded and walked over to me. I stayed hidden at first, but then he called out in a calm voice, "You shouldn't be here." I stepped out slowly, hands raised a little to show I wasn't a threat. He looked at me with eyes that were cold and sharp. "This site isn't for study," he said flatly. I told him I was just doing my job, mapping sinkholes for the state. I explained the humming. He didn't seem interested in my explanation. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed, he said. I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and said, "Go home. Don't come back." His companion didn't say anything but watched me like a hawk. I packed up my camp that night, feeling weird, like I'd stepped into something I wasn't supposed to. On the drive back to Gainesville, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those black ATVs following me. I never called my supervisor about that sinkhole. The next day, I went back out with a coworker, but the hole was gone. The grass looked normal, no dip in the ground, but nothing unusual. I checked my phone and the recording of the hum was gone too, like the file had never existed. That was a few months ago. I still don't know what I saw that night or who those men were, but whatever it wasn't just a sinkhole. I was driving home late that night, somewhere on Highway 89 between Lake Tahoe and Truckee. It was one of those cold, clear November evenings, the kind where your breath fogs up the windows even if the heater's on full blast. The road was mostly empty, just me and the dark trees lining both sides, shadows stretching out like fingers. I was tired but didn't want to stop. The sooner I got home, the better. Then, just as I was passing the little turnout near Donner Summit, I saw her, a woman standing by the shoulder, thumb out. She looked soaked through, wearing a soaked jacket and shivering. I almost didn't stop. This stretch is known for sketchy stuff, and I usually avoid picking up strangers, but something about her made me slow down. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, like she really needed help. I pulled over, cracked the window. "Need a ride?" She nodded quickly, getting in without much fuss. "Thank you," she said, her voice low but steady. Her name was Lisa. She didn't say much at first, just stared out the window while I drove. I glanced over a few times. She had those wide, pale eyes like she hadn't slept in days. There was a faint scent I couldn't place, almost like cold metal mixed with something sweet, but I figured it was just the wet clothes or the car. We drove in silence for a while. The heater hummed, and the tires crunched on the gravel shoulder when I adjusted speed. After about 10 minutes, I glanced at the rearview mirror, but she wasn't there. I turned my head. The back seat was empty. I froze, hand gripping the steering wheel harder than I realized. The door was still locked. The light inside the car was dim, but I could see every corner clearly. No sign she'd gotten out. The seatbelt buckle hung idle. The wet jacket she'd thrown on the seat was gone. I blinked, checked again. Nothing, but the smell was still there. That metallic scent, like a faint electric charge mixed with cold iron, lingering in the air where she'd been. I pulled over to the side, heart pounding, looked back at the empty road, the dense trees on both sides, nothing but silence and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. I called out, "Lisa?" My voice cracked. No answer. I unlocked the doors, got out, and circled the car, shining my flashlight down the shoulder. Nothing. No footprints, no jacket, no sign she'd walked away. I got back in, locked the doors, and stared out into the black forest. The air felt thicker, heavier, like something was watching just beyond the tree line. I wanted to call the cops, but didn't know what to say. Picked up a hitchhiker who disappeared into thin air. They'd think I was nuts. I started the car again, hands still shaking. As I pulled back onto the highway, the metallic smell grew stronger for a moment, then faded as quickly as it had come. For the rest of the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her sitting there, but the back seat stayed empty. I pulled into my driveway at about 1:30 a.m. The house was dark and quiet. I shut off the engine and sat for a minute, trying to process what just happened. I kept smelling that strange, metallic scent in the car, even after I turned off the heater and opened the windows. It was faint, but definitely there. I grabbed a cloth and wiped down the back seat, but it wouldn't go away. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. The next morning I told my sister about it. She just looked at me like I'd lost it, said maybe I was overtired or the stress was getting to me. But I kept thinking about the way Lisa looked, how scared she seemed, like she wasn't just stranded, but running from something. And the smell, that smell. Days later, I found a small patch of wetness on the floor where her feet might have rested. I cleaned it up, but no matter what I did, the metallic scent never completely left the car. Sometimes at night, I swear I can still catch it, faint and cold, like a warning or a reminder. I don't know who Lisa was or where she went, but I'm pretty sure she wasn't just a hitchhiker. We rented the boat out of Crescent Harbor, just south of Ventura. It was me, my wife Allison, and our daughter Grace. Grace had just turned 11. The trip was supposed to be a little early summer send-off before school ended. Nothing fancy, just a 3-day sail up the coast, anchoring near secluded beaches and sleeping on board. We'd done a similar trip the year before, and it was peaceful. No internet, no noise, just ocean. We took out a Catalina 36, roomy enough to not feel cramped, small enough for the three of us to handle. The marina gave us a logbook, clipboard, and spare keys. I filled in our plan, out to San Miguel, a night there, then east toward the shoreline again to anchor off Refugio Beach. Last stop was supposed to be just past El Capitan before heading back. The weather was clear all 3 days. Light wind, smooth current, sunny, but not too hot. By the second night, we were anchored maybe 100 yards offshore, just west of Gaviota. I had the stove running for coffee, and Grace was up on deck watching the horizon with binoculars. Allison was inside trying to get the cabin light working. It kept flickering, even though the battery was full. At some point, Grace said, "There's a star in the water." I stepped up to check. It was around 9:20 p.m., just past nautical twilight. I thought she meant a boat light or some satellite reflection. But when I looked out, there was this small white glow just above the ocean, almost level with the horizon line. It wasn't moving. No reflection in the water, just suspended there, maybe 2-3 feet above the surface. It was round but not sharp, kind of blurred at the edges, like fog. I figured maybe it was a drone from one of the research boats that passed through sometimes, or even something from the Navy base down south. I was about to say that when the light started to rise. Not fast, not slow, just up, perfectly straight, no sound. Allison came up behind me and said, "What's that?" The three of us stood there, watching it. It hovered maybe 50 feet off the water, then stopped again. No blinking lights, no movement side to side. It didn't cast a beam. It just hung there as if gravity didn't apply to it. Then the mast light dimmed, just a little, and the cabin light shut off completely. I tried the switch, then the radio. Nothing. The power panel still showed charge, but the switches weren't responding. The GPS screen turned gray. No signal. I even tried the emergency beacon test. It gave a weak red blink and went dead. The strange thing was the boat didn't feel dead. You know how electronics sometimes fail and everything kind of quiets? It wasn't like that. The water still lapped against the hull. The breeze was steady. The only thing that changed was us. We weren't talking. Not because we were afraid exactly, more like we didn't want to draw attention. Grace asked if she could go inside, and Allison took her below. I kept watching the light. Eventually it started to move. Slowly east, along the horizon, keeping low, never more than 100 feet off the surface. I followed it until it disappeared behind the curve of the coast. Took maybe 3 minutes. The lights came back on, maybe 5 minutes later. Everything powered up at once. The cabin light flickered, the GPS reset, the radio clicked back to its standby channel. No error messages, no logs of outages. I didn't mention it to the harbor office when we returned the next afternoon. Didn't really know how to explain it. But the guy at the desk, a tall man in a black suit, which was weird enough for a marina, asked for our logbook. I handed it to him, and he flipped straight to the second page without reading the front. He didn't check the times or coordinates, just glanced at the notes and said, "You were west of Gaviota last night?" I nodded. He paused for a second, then handed back our key fob. "Some voyages end before the dock," he said. I didn't respond, just took the keys and walked out. I don't think he worked there. I've been back since, a couple times. Nobody's seen anyone by that description. The regular guy at the office says he's the only one who handles returns. I was checking trail cameras in Dead Horse Canyon, up near the northern range, where the forest thins into dry, brushy hills. I volunteer for a wildlife monitoring group that keeps tabs on cougar and bobcat movements, mostly through motion-activated cams we've bolted to trees along old service roads and game trails. It's quiet work. I like that about it. That morning was hot, dry, late July. I'd parked off Forest Road 19 around 6:30 a.m. and started the hike up to the ridge. No wind, no clouds. just the buzz of insects and the crunch of gravel under my boots. The trail cameras were spaced about a mile apart, each tucked in a tree notch or zip-tied to a post. I had 4 to check that morning. First 2 were normal. Just a few deer, 1 coyote, a fox. Third one had a blown battery, so I replaced it and moved on. The last one was positioned overlooking a narrow draw where we'd found mountain lion prints last spring. It's tucked between 2 tall ponderosa pines, angled down a slope toward a low clearing. When I popped the SD card into my tablet, I noticed the last recording was from 2 nights ago. Around 2:17 a.m., the video showed the usual nighttime grain, branches swaying in infrared, a faint animal noise in the background. Then the treetops started lighting up, like moonlight, but brighter, whiter. The camera auto-adjusted, struggling to focus. At the top of the frame, just above the trees, something was there. I couldn't see it clearly, just this dark, egg-shaped blur, hovering maybe 10 or 15 feet above the canopy. No lights, no movement. It didn't drift or wobble like a drone. It just hung there. After maybe 6 seconds, it rose slowly and went out of frame. That was it. No animals showed up after that. The camera didn't record anything else the rest of the night. I watched the clip 3 times in a row, squinting at the shape, trying to convince myself it was a bug on the lens or a trick of light. But I've been reviewing trail footage for 5 years. I've seen bugs, bats, fog, snow, smoke. This wasn't any of those. I hiked back down, loaded the gear into my truck, and drove out to the ranger station just outside Wilson Creek. It's a small concrete building next to the fire lookout garage. Not usually staffed in the mornings, but I know Mike, the district ranger, and figured I could drop off the footage and ask him to review it when he was free. But when I got there, someone else was already inside. There was a black SUV parked next to the shed. No plates. I remember that because I almost backed into it pulling in, and when I looked to see if anyone was inside, the windows were tinted pitch black. The front door to the station was propped open, which is weird for Mike. He's strict about the AC and bugs. I stepped in and froze in the doorway. A man I didn't recognize was standing behind Mike's desk, going through a pile of printer paper. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a black suit, black tie, black dress shoes, no ranger badge, no patch. His hair was dark and slicked back, and his skin looked almost gray. Not pale, just slightly off, like he'd been in fluorescent lighting too long. He turned as I stepped in. His face didn't show any surprise, just this blank kind of interest, like a cashier waiting for you to speak. I said, "Is Mike around?" The man nodded once and said, "He's off-site." Then he gestured at the printouts on the desk. "You're with the Wildlife Survey, correct?" I didn't answer right away. He picked up one of the pages and held it out. It was a black and white thermal still, one of mine, from a week ago, showing a herd of elk crossing a creek. I hadn't uploaded that one to the shared drive yet. I asked, "Who are you with?" He smiled, just barely. "We work parallel to your department. You don't need to be concerned." His voice was flat, low, like he was suppressing an accent. Not robotic, exactly, just weirdly controlled, like each word was measured before he said it. He put the photo down and added, "We've reviewed your recent capture from Unit D4. That was the camera I just hiked to. I hadn't uploaded that footage yet, either. I didn't say anything. I just stood there while he walked over to a side table, picked up a manila folder, and handed it to me. Inside were several grainy printouts, stills from my video, the treetops, the shape above them, the light. He said, "We'll ask that you redirect your research efforts away from the upper ridge for the remainder of the season." That's how he said it. Redirect your research efforts. I asked if something was going on up there. He just looked at me for a moment, then said, "If you've seen anything unusual, we recommend you do not share those details outside of your team." I told him we're a volunteer group. There isn't really a team. He didn't respond. I left the folder on the desk and walked out. I didn't see the SUV drive off, but when I looked back 5 minutes later from the parking area, it was gone. Later that afternoon, I tried to upload the clip to our shared drive, and my tablet crashed. Not just the video app, the whole system went dark. It took me 2 hours to get it to restart, and when it finally did, the SD card was blank. No files. I hadn't backed them up yet. I drove back out 2 days later to recheck the camera. When I got there, the unit was missing. Zip ties cut, mounting post gone, No note, no damage to the tree or signs of animals. We rotate cameras all the time, but no one from my group had been up there. When I emailed Mike asking who had access to the station that morning, he replied, "I was on fire watch all week. Nobody had my keys." I haven't brought it up again. Every now and then, I still drive past the canyon trailhead and think about hiking up there, but I never do. The last time I went near that slope, I swear I heard something above the trees. Not loud, just a soft mechanical hum, like electricity in the air. I didn't look up. I was finishing my last delivery for the night, the kind where everything's quiet, except the hum of the van's engine and the faint buzz of neon signs in the distance. It was just past 11 p.m., and the streets of Cedar Ridge were empty, the kind of empty that makes you notice every little sound. A dog barking 3 blocks away, the scrape of a loose shutter in the wind. I'd done this route enough times that I knew every turn and shortcut without thinking. I pulled into the lot for the last house, an older duplex with peeling paint and a single dim porch light. The van's headlights washed over the driveway, and as I cut the engine, every other exterior light on the street, lamps on poles, security lights, a few from the houses themselves, flickered once in unison. Just a quick dip and back on. I blinked. I muttered something under my breath. Great, power surge or something. But as I stepped out, I noticed it. A soft hum in the air. Not mechanical, not from my van, nothing I could place. It wasn't loud, just low enough that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced up, thinking maybe one of the streetlights had been oscillating strangely, or some transformer down the block was acting up. That's when I saw it. A dim, oval-shaped glow hovered over the trees at the end of the street. Pale, bluish-white, just enough light to make it visible through the thin mist that had rolled in overnight. It moved slowly, almost lazily, in a way that made no sense. It wasn't following the road. It wasn't stationary. It just drifted above the tree line, calm, deliberate. I froze, my hands gripping the package I was supposed to deliver. The hum grew a fraction louder, almost imperceptibly, like the air itself had thickened around me. My brain tried to rationalize. A drone? But I hadn't seen anything like it. No blinking lights, no shape. It was a glow, smooth, uniform, not mechanical. I stepped back toward the van, heart racing, and the glow tilted slightly, moving along the street at a pace that felt off. I squinted, and it seemed to pause whenever I blinked or shifted my gaze. The hum never stopped. I reached for my phone to grab a picture, and the glow dimmed as if sensing the motion. It wasn't gone entirely, but it faded just enough that my camera couldn't pick it up properly. I lowered the phone and watched as it drifted toward the far edge of the trees and vanished completely. No fade into the sky, no movement behind the clouds, just gone. I stood there for a long moment, the hum gone, the lights normal, the street entirely silent again. My hands were trembling, and I realized I hadn't even breathed for a while. Shaking, I got back into the van. The engine started smoothly, no hiccups, no interference, nothing that suggested anything abnormal had occurred except for my own nerves. I drove slowly down the street, glancing up at the tree line again. Nothing. Every house was dark, every lamp steady. The neighborhood was ordinary again. On the way back to the depot, my mind replayed the event over and over. The synchronization of the lights, the hum, the slow drift of that glow, it all made sense in no logical way. I thought about stopping at a gas station to tell someone, anyone, but I realized there'd be no evidence. No trail, no video, no drone or drone pilot to question. Just me. I kept thinking I'd missed something. Maybe there was a plane behind the clouds? No, too slow, too deliberate. A weather balloon? Could be. Except of all the nights I've driven these streets, I'd never seen one behave like that, and the glow didn't move with the wind. By the time I reached the depot, the sun was starting to push light across the horizon. The event was hours ago in real time, but it felt like it had stretched out, moments dragging one after another. I parked the van, took a deep breath, and tried to shake it off. Later, I told my supervisor, half laughing, trying to sound casual. He nodded, said maybe a transformer or a low cloud catching city lights. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to. But I could still feel it, the hum vibrating faintly in my chest like an echo left behind by something that shouldn't exist. That night, on the drive home, I found myself looking up at the sky more than the road. Every flicker of light in the distance made me check instinctively. Every shadow along the tree line made me tense. I didn't see the glow again, but I could feel the memory of it, the way it hovered silently, completely indifferent to me or my van. I parked at home and sat in the driveway for a while. The neighborhood was quiet, normal. No hum, no flickering lights, no pale glow drifting across the sky. I finally got out, leaned against the van, and let the cold air settle on me. I couldn't explain it. Nothing about it fit with anything I knew. And yet, it happened. I've made deliveries in that area dozens of times before and since. I've seen fog, power blips, strange reflections, you name it, none of them compare. Every time the night is still, I find myself glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see that soft oval of light drifting slowly, moving in ways that no earthly thing should. I don't tell anyone else about it anymore. You can't. People would laugh or shake their heads. But I remember every flicker of lights, every soft hum, every impossibly slow drift of that glow. It was real, in a way that doesn't fit into the world we think we know, and the quiet that followed it, that, I think, haunts me more than the glow itself. We were halfway through the third pull on the span when the rain stopped, like someone had shut off a faucet. Name's Ryan. I work for County Electric, been a lineman for 12 years. That night, a cell had tracked in quick, heavy, fast-moving, the kind you watch on the scanner and know the phones at the office will start ringing. Around midnight, we got the report. A feeder had tripped somewhere between pole 47 and the substation. No houses down, just a big strip of rural line and a couple of farms. We loaded the truck, grabbed the double hot sticks, and drove out in a line of trucks like we always do, lights turning the rain into streaks along the road. The odd things began before we even got set up. The radio in my rig started cutting in and out with this thin, high static that none of us could tune away. Marco, my ground man, said it sounded like interference from a passing storm cell and shrugged. He's older and less wired for fuss, been on crews since before I was born, so when he shrugs, I try not to freak. The scanner was busy with weather reports, lightning strikes, and somebody somewhere calling that an automated breaker had tripped. It all sounded normal for a night like that, except for the way the static would climb in frequency every few minutes, and the way the rain, which had been steady on the truck hood, would stop in a perfect circle over the tree line and then come back hard. Like the storm itself had teeth. We set the bucket under pole 47 and raised up. The wind was a living thing by then, gusting and wrenching at the truck, even on the outriggers. You learn to ignore the elements until you don't, and the first 10 feet felt like routine. Seat locked, harness clipped, hot gloves on. The lights on the dash flicked in the rain. The floodlight on the boom cut a cone through the dark. Marco talked through his headset. "Ryan, you good up there?" He was a voice I trusted. I told him I was ready. Up in the bucket is the kind of isolation you don't get anywhere else. You speak to the ground over a throat mic and the world below becomes a model. Trucks, cones, orange vests. Up there you're small and exposed. You feel the line under your hands in a way that's the only thing that keeps you pointed at the work. That night, the line felt wrong. It wasn't sag or tight. It hummed under the gloves, a deep, steady vibration through the towers that I've felt before when the system's healthy. But this was stronger and steady in a way it shouldn't be, with the breaker open. I was finishing the second clamp and thinking quick about the third when my radio went blank. Not static, just nothing. The little green receive light on my handset glowed, but there was no other voice, no dispatcher telling us to hold, no check-in from the crew behind us. For a moment I thought the headset had popped off. I tugged it back into place and called down, "Marco, can you hear me?" He answered, but the delay from the tower's feeds made his voice thin and far. He said, "Yeah, we got you. Power's still out on this spur." Then there was that thin hiss, and his voice cut. And then the rain stopped. It didn't taper. The drops just stopped midair, and the world was reduced to the sound of the bucket's motor and my own breathing. You think storms are noisy no matter what, but that silence was complete, almost heavy. I could make out the blood bass of the feeder under me, the line's tone, and the tiny squeal of ceramic on post. All the small mechanical noises you never notice until everything else falls away. I looked up out from under my hard hat and saw it move across the cloud deck. It was pale, like the inside of a fog bank lit from within, and it drifted slow and lazy against the black. Not a pinpoint, not a streak. Big, a patch. Enough to eat several constellations if there had been constellations to see through the clouds. It had a shape, a soft oval with edges that kind of trailed like steam blown by a fan. It moved so slow I thought maybe it was a low cloud feature riding the airstream. Then lightning lanced through the bank like a photographic flash, and for an instant I saw the outline. When a cloud lights up, it lights everything in it. That flash was like focus. There was a form inside that lighter patch, and it was wrong. The silhouette had straight edges here and there, corners that shouldn't be in a cumulus, like maybe a wing, but not a wing I recognized. Big, flat-ish sections like the side of a hangar, then a rounder belly. Size-wise, if that shadow was 200 feet across, I wouldn't have been shocked. It didn't look like a plane. It didn't have navigation lights. I could see the cloud itself roll around it as if it was something the cloud was sliding past. The next lightning strike, slower this time because the whole place was charged, illuminated it again, and I could see the edges clearer, the negative space between cloud and shape. It outlined dimensions that didn't make sense for any man-made craft I'd ever seen. The hair on my arms rose. I had the hot stick in my hand and the clamp under my glove, but there's no training for the way your hands go cotton soft when you look up and see scale wrong. The weird little things started stacking up. The metal on the line turned a faint blue under that light, like everything that touched the shape had been painted with a pale wash. My watch ticked but seemed slow. I remember checking it twice and thinking the second hand lingered on a number longer than it should. The comms came back sporadically. Control to County 1 on the scanner reported multiple grid anomalies, and then again gone. Marco's voice came through once, clipped, "You seeing?" And the line petered to white noise right after. No static. The kind of silence that says the air itself isn't taking the message. It hovered above us for what felt like a long time. The bucket creaked. I could see the creek below where the flash reflected off the water like silver coins. There were no birds. Normally, swallows will slice and duck around the tower no matter the weather. That night, there was nothing. Not a single animal noise. Even the flies up there had stopped. And that's when the size of it settled in. It had this presence that seemed to claim the air below. We kept working. You do, because your job is to restore the feed and keep people safe. I tightened the third clamp, triple-checked ground, and prepared to re-energize when the primary came back. The control center was pinging, and then the breaker clicked on in a way I felt through my chest. A low thump through the line and the world hummed to life around me. The hotline hum normalized, the ceramic squeal changed pitch, and the line's vibration went from this odd steady tone to the clean frequency I know. Power was back on the spur. At the exact moment the breaker closed, whatever that pale thing was slipped. The cloud lighting faded, and in the flash the silhouette thinned and then sheared away like someone unrolled a screen. It left no contrail, no sound, nothing. One lightning bolt later, the sky was a complicated, normal thunderhead again. The radio came alive with voices, and the rain returned full tilt as if something had released an inhalation. After the line was stable, I climbed down. On the ground, Marco swore and half laughed. He said his phone had gone dead in his pocket, and he actually thought the weather had fried it. The little LED voltmeter I keep in the toolbox read all normal. Our DVR out at the substation recorded a minute or two of weird static at the same timestamp we'd lost on the scanner, but nothing physical. No aircraft on radar, no debris found, nothing to point to. The men on the other crews said they'd seen odd flashes on the cloud deck from the other side of the county, like flashbulbs popping in slow motion. Dispatch logged the event as a grid anomaly and filed it under weather-related unexplained. Official speak. Speak. They told the paper a formula about lightning and charged pockets, and nobody wanted to hear a lineman tell them that lightning had backlit something that didn't look like a plane. I drove home slow with the truck lights on low, rain spitting at the windshield in that raw way. It was hard to sleep afterward. Not because I felt haunted, but because my head kept making lists. The odd tone in the line before the breaker, the way the noise died, the exact moment the breaker closed and the thing left. I checked the camera on the barn of the closest farm the next morning. The footage shows a storm, a lot of light, and a period where the audio drops out. No silhouette, no object. The timestamps on the feed line up to the grid logs. There's a 9-second window my camera recorded as plain white snow and nothing else. People want answers, but I don't have one. I don't have a story about lights on or secret aircraft or military tests. I have a night where the job took me up above the noise, where the weather did something I've only seen on nature programs, and where a form the size of a hangar moved through a low cloud, quiet as fog. I have the way my hands felt loose in my gloves when it happened, the steady click of the breaker, and the small, stubborn fact that as soon as the grid came back, the sky changed. Every time I drive past Pole 47 now, I find myself unconsciously looking up at the clouds. Mostly, it's just clouds and weather, the kind of sky you talk about with other linemen. Watch that front, it'll burn east. But sometimes, when there's lightning in the distance and a low bank hangs fat and patient on the horizon, my gut tightens and I think about that pale shape and how the world went quiet long enough for me to see it. We started the hike later than we should have. There were 4 of us, me, Aaron, his girlfriend Lindsay, and my cousin Brian. We were camping for the weekend near the Niagara Gorge, a few miles north of Lewiston on the New York side. It was early September, still warm during the day, but cold enough at night that your breath fogged a little. We'd spent the evening down by the river drinking and talking. Aaron had this idea to hike partway up the gorge trail after dark, just to see what it's like. He said the moon would be bright enough to light the path. It sounded stupid, but we were all a few beers in and restless, so we went along. By the time we started walking, it was past 11. The air had that wet, earthy smell that comes off the river at night. Crickets were loud, and the occasional gust of wind would rattle the trees hard enough to make it sound like footsteps. We had 2 flashlights between us, one of those dim headlamps strapped to Aaron's forehead, and a big mag light I'd brought from the truck. The first part of the trail was fine. You could see the river through the trees every now and then, just a black stretch of moving water catching bits of moonlight. The drop-off on the left side made me nervous. The path was narrow, and loose gravel kept slipping under our boots. Around midnight, we stopped to rest at a small clearing that overlooked part of the gorge. The view was incredible, just this wide, dark canyon with the faint shimmer of the river down below. The sound of rushing water echoed up from somewhere deep in the gorge. It was peaceful, until Lindsay said, "What's that?" She was pointing down toward the bottom of the gorge. At first, I didn't see anything, but then Aaron killed his headlamp and the faint glow became obvious. It was orange, like a campfire, but dimmer, more spread out. It wasn't flickering the way fire should. It just glowed steadily, kind of pulsing every few seconds. None of us said anything for a bit. We just stared. It looked far away, but the scale was hard to tell in the dark. My first thought was that maybe someone had set up a camp down there, though I'd never seen anyone camp at the base before. It's steep and hard to reach. Brian said it didn't look like firelight at all. He was right. The glow wasn't reflecting off anything, not the trees or the rocks. It seemed like it was coming from the ground itself. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes watching it. Every so often it would fade, then brighten again, never going out completely. Aaron suggested hiking down a bit to see it better, but the trail narrowed fast and we didn't have enough light. Lindsay flat out refused, so we decided to turn back. That's when I noticed something weird. The air had gone totally still. No wind, no crickets, nothing. Even the river sounded quieter, like it was farther away. I didn't say anything, but the silence made my skin prickle. Aaron must have felt it too, because he whispered, "Do you guys feel that?" A moment later, there was this low hum, not loud but deep, like it was coming from underground. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. The glow pulsed brighter right after, then faded again. That was enough for Lindsay. She started walking back toward camp, saying she didn't care what it was, she just wanted to leave. None of us argued. The hike back felt longer. Every sound we made, boots on gravel, branches snapping, seemed too sharp against the silence. About halfway up, Brian said his phone had lost signal, which was weird because we'd had full bars before. I checked mine. Same thing. No service. When we finally made it back to camp, the fire had burned down to coals. Nobody said much. We each had a drink, then went to our tents. I lay awake for a long time, listening. I thought I heard the hum again once, but faint and far away. I told myself I imagined it. The next morning, we all agreed to hike back down and check the spot where we'd seen the light. It was around 9 a.m., clear sky, sun already warming the rocks. We followed the same path to the overlook and found the landmark, a big boulder with a dead tree beside it, then started carefully down the slope. The trail near the bottom was muddy and overgrown, but eventually we reached the flat area near the riverbank. It took some guessing to find the exact spot we'd been looking at from above, but when we did, we knew right away. There was a circular patch of scorched ground about 15 feet across. The dirt was dark, almost black, and dry to the touch, even though everything else nearby was damp from dew. The edges of the circle were sharp, like something had burned just that section and nothing else. The trees surrounding it were untouched, no singe marks, no fallen branches. Even the grass a few inches outside the ring was green. Aaron crouched down and poked at the soil with a stick. It broke apart easily like ash, but it didn't smell like anything. No smoke, no charred wood, just dust. "What the hell could do that?" he said. We all kind of stood there, waiting for someone to come up with an answer. Brian guessed maybe lightning, but there were no storms the night before, and there was no sign of an impact point or damage to the nearby trees. I tried to picture a campfire, but the shape was too perfect. No rocks arranged in a circle, no leftover wood or trash. Just that strange burn mark in the dirt. We stayed down there for about 20 minutes. Lindsay wouldn't step inside the circle. She kept saying it made her feel dizzy just looking at it. When we finally left, I took a few photos on my phone. They came out fine on the screen, but later that night, when I looked at them in my camera roll, they were all slightly off. The images were grainy and washed out, like the light exposure was wrong. The rest of my pictures from that weekend looked normal. That afternoon, back at camp, Aaron brought up the hum again. He said when it happened, he felt pressure in his chest, almost like when you're in an airplane and your ears need to pop. Brian said he hadn't felt that, but he'd noticed a faint vibration under his feet right before the sound stopped. I didn't say it at the time, but when we were down there looking at the circle, I'd felt something similar. Not while standing in it, just when I got close to the edge. A kind of static charge, like the air right before a storm. My hair stood up a little. I told myself it was just my nerves. We ended the trip early that day. None of us wanted to spend another night there. On the drive home, Aaron joked about calling someone from the park service to report it, but we never did. A few days later, I checked online for fire reports or anything about lightning strikes near the gorge that night. Nothing came up. I also tried looking up satellite imagery, but of course, the resolution wasn't good enough to see anything that specific. The last odd thing happened about a week afterward. I was sitting on my porch back in Buffalo, scrolling through my phone, when I thought I heard that same low hum again. It wasn't as strong, just a faint vibration like a truck idling far away, but it stopped me cold. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then faded. I walked out to the yard and listened. Everything was quiet again. I haven't heard it since. I don't really talk to the others about it anymore either. We all agreed it was probably something explainable, a geological thing, or some industrial runoff causing weird effects, but I know none of us really believe that. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I look at those photos on my phone. The burned patch is there, clear as day, but every time I zoom in, it feels like I can see faint color shifts in the soil, tiny streaks of orange, almost like the light's still buried under there, waiting. I was driving through farmland in eastern Kansas around 2 in the morning. I'd been on the road since late evening, heading back from visiting my brother in Wichita. It was one of those stretches of highway where you can drive 20 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. Just dark fields on both sides, the occasional windmill, and the low hum of the tires on the asphalt. I wasn't tired, exactly, but I was zoning out a bit, just trying to get home. The only light came from my headlights and the glow of the dashboard. Every now and then, a mailbox or a fence post would flash by. Then I noticed this red light behind me. At first, I figured it was a car way back in the distance. just a single red dot, too far away to tell if it was one tail light or two. But what caught my attention was that it didn't seem to get any closer. I drove another few miles, checked again. It was still there, the same distance back, same brightness. I remember glancing at the clock. 2:14 a.m. I was maybe 40 minutes from home. The highway had dipped into a low, flat stretch where the land was completely open. No trees, no houses, just fields. I sped up to around 80 for a bit. When I looked again, the light was still there. Same spot. That got under my skin. I slowed down to 60. It didn't close the distance. I braked a little harder, down to 50, and it didn't shrink away either. It just hung there like it was matching me. I told myself it was probably some weird reflection, maybe a distant tower light bouncing off the rear window or something. But when I shifted slightly in my seat, the angle didn't change. The light was behind me, not above or off to the side. After a few more miles, I started to notice how steady it was. It didn't flicker, didn't wobble like a car's headlights on a bumpy road would. Just this fixed, glowing red point in the darkness. I checked the rear view again and again, convincing myself it had to be a vehicle. But no shape, no beams, nothing, just the light. There was this one turnoff coming up, an old gravel farm road I'd used before when cutting across the county. I decided to take it and see what the light did. I slowed down, flipped on my blinker, and made the turn. My headlights swept across a stretch of low grass and a fence line. The gravel crunched under my tires. When I glanced back, I expected the red light to pass by on the highway behind me. It didn't. It turned. It wasn't sudden. It just shifted its angle, followed the curve I'd made, and settled back into the same distance behind me, hovering over the road like before. That's when my stomach really dropped. I stopped thinking weird reflection and started thinking someone's screwing with me. I kept going for another half mile. The road was rough, with little dips and potholes, and I could see dust swirling in the beams of my taillights. But through it all, that red light stayed steady. Same height, same distance. I slowed again down to maybe 20, and it slowed too. At that point, I started to feel this kind of pressure in my chest, like that heavy, nervous feeling when you're about to do something stupid. I didn't know what to do. There weren't any houses nearby, no shoulder to pull onto, just endless farmland. I finally decided to stop completely. I eased to a stop on the right side of the road and threw it in park. My headlights shone out into an open field. Everything was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind. I looked up into the mirror. The red light was still there, perfectly still, maybe a couple 100 feet behind me. I sat there for a while just staring at it. My hands were tight on the wheel. I don't know why I didn't just drive off, but something in me wanted to see what it would do if I didn't move. About a minute passed. Then it started to move forward. It didn't bounce or sway like something attached to a vehicle. It just glided toward me, completely smooth, closing half the distance before stopping again. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I thought about throwing the car in reverse and gunning it, but I couldn't make myself move. Then, as I watched, it began to rise. Not fast, just a steady upward climb, like a balloon lifting into the air, except perfectly straight. No wobble, no sound. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. It went higher and higher until it was above the horizon line. Then, right when it reached a point where I'd have to crane my neck to see it, it blinked out. Gone. I stayed there for a long time after that, trying to listen for anything, an engine, maybe a drone buzzing, but there was nothing, just silence. I got out of the car at one point, even though my legs were shaking. The air was cool and damp. Gravel crunched under my boots. I looked up and saw a few stars, a faint wisp of clouds, but no red light anywhere. After a couple minutes, I got back in and started driving again. My hands were still trembling. I made it back to the highway, half expecting to see it waiting for me, but the sky was empty. The rest of the drive was quiet. I didn't see another car until I hit town. I pulled into a gas station that was open all night, parked under the bright lights, and just sat there. I checked my phone. It said 3:11 a.m. The drive from where I'd stopped to there shouldn't have taken that long. Maybe I was just sitting longer than I realized. I tried to tell myself it was a drone, some kid messing around maybe, but it didn't move like any drone I've seen. It didn't make a sound, and it kept perfectly level the whole time. When I finally got home, I parked the car and sat in the driveway for a while, headlights off, just watching the sky. I kept thinking I'd see that red light again out over the fields. I never did. But every time I drive that stretch of road now, I catch myself checking the mirror more than I should. There's this one section where the land opens up flat, and for a few seconds you can see miles of nothing behind you. I always look. I don't even know what I'm hoping to see. It was a little after 11 when I started the drive back from visiting my brother in Cheyenne. I'd stayed later than I meant to. We'd watched the end of a Rockies game, and I didn't feel like crashing on his couch, so I figured I'd just make the 2-hour drive home to Scottsbluff. I'd done it plenty of times before. That stretch of Highway 85 between Wyoming and Nebraska isn't much to look at, just long, empty blacktop cutting through flat farmland and ranches. At night, it feels like the middle of nowhere. The sky was clear, the kind of deep blue-black you only get away from city lights. I could see every star. There wasn't much traffic, maybe one semi every 20 minutes, so I kept the cruise control on and some old rock playing low. I first noticed the cluster about halfway between Torrington and Lingle. It was low in the sky ahead of me, toward the southeast, and I thought it was just a bright patch of stars. But something about it looked off. The points of light were close together, maybe 8 or 9 of them, and they were brighter than anything else around, almost bluish-white. At first, I assumed it was a plane formation, maybe military, though I'd never seen anything like that there. They were moving together, slow and steady, like a small constellation gliding across the horizon. I watched them for a while, trying to figure it out. Every so often, I'd look back at the road or check my mirrors, and then glance up again. The pattern stayed the same, a tight bunch of lights sliding left to right. Then I looked down for maybe 3 seconds. I remember checking my odometer or the gas gauge, and when I looked back up, they were in a straight line. Not stretched out like a shooting star trail, but lined up perfectly, evenly spaced, cutting diagonally across the sky. It was so clean it didn't look natural. My first thought was maybe satellites, but they were too close together and too low, and they weren't following a steady arc. The whole line just drifted slowly, staying the same distance above the horizon. I turned the music down and rolled my window a little. No sound except the tires on the asphalt and wind. For the next 10 minutes, they stayed there, matching my direction like I was pacing them. Once or twice, I thought I saw one light blink out, then reappear. The weirdest part was how they didn't twinkle like stars, just this steady, cold glow. The road was dead straight, and there weren't any good pull-offs, so I just kept driving. After a while, I convinced myself it had to be something explainable, maybe some flight pattern I didn't know about. I was tired too. It was late, and the drive gets hypnotic after a while. A little past Huntley, the lights began to shift again. Slowly at first, then more deliberately, the line bent into a shallow curve, like a smile. Then the ends of the curve lifted upward until the whole formation was shaped like an arc. That's when I pulled over. I eased onto the shoulder, left the engine running, and stepped out. The air was cold, quiet, except for crickets and the faint ticking of my cooling brakes. The lights hung there, silent and perfectly still for a few seconds, then started to move again. Not drifting this time, but shifting in place. The arc folded inward, the points drawing toward the center until they clustered again, back into almost the same tight group I'd first seen. It was strange how smooth it looked. No jerking or flickering, just fluid motion, like something alive. I stared for what felt like maybe a minute. Then everything went black. Not the sky. The sky was still there, but my headlights, the dash, the taillights, even the little red glow from the radio. All of it blinked off at once. The engine was still running fine, but every light in or on the truck was dead. I remember standing there, frozen, my hands still on the doorframe, staring up at those lights while my truck idled beside me in total darkness. The only sound was the low rumble of the engine and my own breathing. Then, just as fast, everything came back on. Headlights, dash lights, radio. The volume blared for a second before I turned it down. When I looked back up, the cluster was gone. The sky was empty. I stood there for a bit, scanning the horizon. Nothing. Just normal stars. Eventually, I got back in and pulled onto the road. I kept checking the mirrors, the sky, half expecting the lights to reappear. They didn't. A few miles later, I noticed the clock on my dash was off. It read 12:43, but my phone said 12:26. I thought maybe it had reset when the power cut out, but it didn't start from 12 left, like it would if the battery disconnected. It had jumped forward, like time had skipped. I didn't think too much about it then, I just wanted to get home. The rest of the drive was quiet, but something felt different. The air in the cab felt heavier, like the pressure had changed. My ears kept popping even though I wasn't gaining elevation. I remember glancing in the mirror and catching a faint flash. A single white light far behind me, low on the horizon. I couldn't tell if it was a distant car or something else. When I finally hit the Nebraska line and the first gas station appeared, I pulled in just to have lights and people around. The cashier was some kid, maybe 19 or 20, earbuds in, scrolling on his phone. I asked if they'd had a power surge a little while ago. He said no, everything had been fine. On my way out, I looked up again. Clear sky, nothing moving. When I got home around 1:30, I parked and sat there for a minute before going inside. My hands were shaking just slightly. I noticed my headlights flickered again when I killed the ignition. Not completely off this time, just a quick dim. That bugged me enough that I checked the battery terminals the next day. Everything was tight, no corrosion. The truck started fine, lights normal. I kept thinking maybe I'd seen some new kind of satellite thing, and I even looked up those Starlink trains, but they move in one direction in a perfect line and vanish over the horizon. What I saw changed shape. It moved too slow for that, too deliberate. A week later, driving home from work, I saw something faintly similar. Just two bright points low in the sky, moving together. For a second, I thought it was happening again. But then one light turned red, and I realized it was a plane banking toward the airport. I laughed out loud, more out of relief than anything. Still, that first night has stuck with me. I keep trying to remember if I could have mixed up where the stars were, or maybe the power cut was just coincidence. But the way those lights rearranged, perfectly geometric, like they were following some pattern, I can't explain that part away. Sometimes I'll drive that same route late, just to test myself. I'll glance out at the horizon, half hoping I won't see anything unusual. But every time, when I catch a glimpse of a bright cluster or a distant plane, I feel that same pull in my gut, that quiet waiting feeling, like I'm not done with whatever I saw that night. And I'll watch a little too long, just to make sure the stars stay where they're supposed to. I filmed it because I couldn't not. I'd been hiking the Ridgeway Trail since I was a kid, and I know when to put the phone away and when to take it out. This was the kind of sighting that felt small and sensible in the moment, but too good to lose. It was August, the kind of hot dusk where the air hangs like a blanket, and the bugs make a steady shush in the leaves. I had started late because work had run over, and I was above the third switchback when the thing showed up. At first, I thought it was a reflection, sun dragging off the surface of the stream below, or maybe some guy with a flashlight in bad timing. But it was higher than the tree line, not a reflection at all. It was silver, maybe 20 to 30 feet across, flattened on the bottom so it looked like a coin suspended on edge. It moved slow and deliberate, no jerks, no wings, and there was no sound. Birds kept flying past it and didn't spook. The air did not change. I switched on my camera and shot a short clip, my hand a little shaky because you realize you're doing something you might later have to defend as not being a hallucination. The clip didn't capture a lot. My phone showed the usual downgrading, grain in the dark, the silver a smear, but when I replayed it right there, the motion looked wrong in the best way. The object slid left, paused, and then drifted off behind the ridgeline. I stayed put for a long time after, sweating and thinking. I didn't post the clip anywhere that night. I told myself I'd sleep on it. I didn't sleep. The next day, I put the clip on my laptop and watched it again. If you're used to digital things, you learn to mistrust them. Cameras crop and compress, and phone cameras are worse in low light. The file was noisy, but you could see the shape, and you could see how the leaves in the foreground didn't rustle when it passed. I sent it to Ben, who runs the outdoor blog I write for, And he replied in 5 minutes with the kind of joke only people who know each other well make. Either you found a mirror factory in the sky, or you've had one too many trail beers. He asked where I'd been, and I told him, and he said he'd come up next weekend with a pair of binoculars. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the clip-on loop, I noticed my wall clock slip a minute forward. I shrugged it off as the cheap clock it was, but then my bedside alarm phone blinked 2:13 a.m., even though I'd turned the alarm off. I nudged it and the display corrected itself. Tiny, nothing things. Mostly, they made me notice the rest of my day in a way I hadn't before, how I walked where the light hit the windows, like looking for seams. 2 nights after the hike, the first one pulled up outside my house. It was a black sedan, older model but in near new condition, sitting under the street lamp on the curb across from my place. I live on a narrow lane where cars don't park overnight unless someone's visiting. It was exactly 2:13 a.m. according to my phone's little corner clock because I checked it when I turned, half awake from a nap. The driver's area was dark, the windows heavily tinted. The headlights were off. There was no engine noise. The lane smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt. I stood by the curtain and watched. The car idled there for 18 minutes, and every minute ate something from the house on the inside. My dog, Gus, who is normally sound asleep on the rug, got up and padded to the door and sat, not barking, but staring. He's a good dog, not skittish, and the way he looked at the window felt like a warning. When the car finally left, it did so slow and quiet. It rolled away and disappeared at the first intersection, like it had started the engine only when it wanted to be seen leaving. The next night, same time, 2:13 a.m., same place. The night after that, same again. For a week, the sedan appeared under the street lamp like clockwork. I tried to catch someone getting out. I stepped into the backyard in my shorts and flip-flops and called out toward the lane. My voice sounded silly against the quiet. The car didn't move. Once I thought I saw a silhouette in the passenger side, like someone leaning forward, but when I blinked, it was gone. A neighbor who walks his dog early in the morning told me he thought I was tired when I asked him if he'd seen the car. He said he'd glanced and it looked empty. I started logging it. 2:13 a.m., 2:13 a.m., 2:13 a.m. I even set my old analog watch by the wall clock because obsession makes you want more measurements. I tried different tricks. I put my motion camera on the porch aimed at the street, cheap but serviceable. I left the hallway light on with the blinds up. I sat in my car with the engine running in the driveway, waiting with the radio low. Each night, the sedan was there at 2:13, and each night I came up with a new reason to doubt what I was seeing. Maybe it was a coworker's friend. Maybe it was someone watching for car thieves. Maybe I'd been keyed into a coincidence and the human brain loves patterns. Ben kept asking for the clip. He thought he could run it through some filters and make a better image. I was reluctant to hand it over because it felt like private proof, the sort of thing you keep in case you need to show someone and have the world tilt toward believing you for a moment. I made copies and put one on an SD card and slid it into the top drawer. That night, the car was there at 2:13. I slept with the lights on. On the 8th night, the car stayed until 3:01 a.m. I noted the change with a small kick of adrenaline, and then at 3:02, the car turned and came down the block and eased to a stop opposite my house. That's when I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my keys, my flashlight, and went out. The porch boards creaked under my feet. Gus followed me, but stopped at the threshold. He is not a confrontational dog. The car's windows were black. The license plate looked ordinary, but when I trained my flashlight at it, the plate reflected like any plate would, and then the digits looked wrong. Not missing, but blurred by a soft bloom that reduced numbers to shapes. I felt foolish and small and terribly exposed. I called out, "Hey!" in what I hoped was an assertive tone. Nothing. Then the sedan's passenger window rolled down a finger's width with a quiet, precise motion, and a hand reached out and tapped the glass of the driver's side first. Not in hail your attention way, but almost perfunctorily, like a metronome. The touch made no sound on the glass. No one opened a door. No one stepped out. The car idled with radioactive patience. I stood there a long minute, waiting for a human reaction, for the shuffling of feet or the buzz of a phone. The car's interior remained a dark cave. Finally, I felt my face burn hot with foolishness and walked back inside. For the next 2 days, the car was there. Gus would sit by the window and watch and never bark. Ben showed up the following weekend with those big binoculars and his skeptical face, and he spent an afternoon on my roof with his tripod and told me to slow down on the paranoia. If someone is following you, he said, get plates. Call the cops. The first part I tried to do later that night when I saw the sedan again. I dialed 911 and the PCP said if there was no threat, there wasn't a lot they could do, and could I call in the morning with a description? I felt ridiculous and safe enough to be ignored. Then the other little things started. My phone, which usually charged on the nightstand fine, failed to charge one night and displayed only a black screen. My cheap porch camera recorded an empty street with one anomalous blank in the footage. An odd black rectangle about a meter across right where the car had been. If you watched the video frame by frame, there was nothing. One instant the street, the next instant a column of nothing, and then empty street again. The camera logged the clip with a timestamp of 2:13:07. The DVR in the garage, same story. A brief patch where the feed went gray and then returned. I tried to play the missing fragment back on the laptop and the media player simply stalled. A week in, I saw the car from the intersection at the end of the lane and drove up behind it. Maybe, I thought, if I followed at a reasonable distance, the driver would turn and I'd get a plate. I kept 50 yards behind, and the car never seemed to speed up or slow down to distance me. It simply maintained that perfect gap, like a shadow. We passed one stoplight and then another, and at the second light, the car in front of us eased forward, and then, with no blink or pause, it wasn't there. The road ahead was empty, and the GPS showed a solid line of road. I checked the mirror for brake lights. Nothing. I sat on the horn like an idiot for a second, and then the car reappeared at the next bend, idling at the curb like it had been waiting for me to notice something in particular. I was near the edge of being honest with myself. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. It wasn't a person playing a prank, unless the prankster had money and the patience of a saint. Then they came to the door. It was a Tuesday. Rain like someone was rinsing the world. Gus thumped his tail but didn't bark when the knock came. It was 2:13 a.m., which I only noticed because the digital clock on my microwave flickered awake the moment the knock started. There were 3 of them, measured and clear on the front step. I opened the door and 2 men were standing in the dark, black umbrellas folded like swords at their sides, long black coats over suits. They were not at all what you expect in a late-night doorstep glare. Their suits were matte and well-tailored, their shoes clean. They had simple faces, neither particularly young nor old, and both wore neutral expressions that made their eyes look a little too intent. "Good evening," the taller one said. He sounded like a radio announcer without the smile. "We are here to speak about your footage." My heart lurched because I hadn't told anyone I'd filmed the object. I felt sick with that private proof in the top drawer. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice lower than I felt. The shorter man's mouth moved slowly. "We're with the office," he said. "We need to review the original file. Please." "How did you?" I began, and stopped because it sounded alarmist, and I wanted to be calm and reasonable on some human level. "You can hand it to us, or we can wait." The tall one spread his hands a hair, palms up, an oddly conciliatory gesture. "We're not here to make trouble." I could feel the ridiculousness of bargaining with 2 strangers on my porch at 2:13 a.m., but I also felt that old, stubborn part of me that hates being bullied. The SD card was in my drawer. I could hand it over and be done, and maybe the car would stop appearing and my sleep unstick. Or I could hold on to it and keep measuring. "I don't want anyone riffling through my stuff," I said. "If you're law enforcement, show a badge." They exchanged a look, the kind people exchange when they know something private. The taller man's face didn't change. "We are not law enforcement in the familiar sense." He said it as if he'd offered a weather report. The shorter man added, "You reported no auditory disturbances?" "No," I said, slow. My throat felt thick. They both smiled at the same instant, a tiny, synchronous lift that looked practiced. The taller man said, "Thank you for your cooperation." The shorter one nodded and tilted his head as if checking a list. Then they turned and walked away down my drive into the rain. No car waited. They simply stepped off the porch and were gone into the dark and the drizzle in the way people fall out of sight behind heavy curtains. The knock had sounded loud in the moment, and now the street was the same rain-gray stretch it had been for years. That was the last night the car pulled up. I handed the SD card to Ben a few days later and told him the whole thing, abridged and messy. He asked to keep a copy. He ran the file through filters until it looked cleaner, but it never gave more than the same silver smear to an interested eye. He told me not to post it. He said he'd been phoned by someone who identified themselves as a reporter and asked what his source on outdoor phenomena was. Ben told the man he worked with freelance folks and to go away. After the two men came and asked for the file, the nights got back to normal. Gus stopped padding to the window at 2:13. The porch camera never again showed the odd black rectangle. The car never came. The microwave clock no longer blinked at odd minutes. That doesn't mean the feeling left. I still check the trees when the wind dies down. I still wake up some nights and sit with my phone and watch the time change. I sleep, I go to work, I hike on the ridgeway when the weather is right, and once in a while I pull the clip out and look at the smear of silver and wonder what the people on my porch had seen. They said so little. We need to review the original file. We're not here to make trouble. And they left the problem where it had been, on one small shelf of my life, private and unsettled. I'm not saying I know what they were or what the car was. I don't. I know the clock on my microwave lit up at 2:13 for a while and then it didn't. I know two men in black stood on my porch and asked a polite, strange question. I know the nights rearranged themselves around that precise minute for a time. And I know Gus is a lighter sleeper now, the way someone who's been paying attention to small things is lighter. I was driving home late from a double shift at the clinic. The kind of night where your brain is fogged and your body keeps telling you to stop and sleep, but your car keeps going anyway. It was a Thursday. Fog rolling in off the ocean, thicker than it usually does this time of year. Low, wet, smelling of kelp and diesel. And the stretch of road I take is mostly empty between the town and the small subdivision where Anna and I rent a place. I know the turns by muscle memory. Past the gas station, under the broken streetlight, through a pair of tight curves where the cliffs come close to the road. I like that route because it's quiet and short, and the ocean is somewhere over your left shoulder the whole way, a black suggestion you can't actually see. The first odd thing was nothing dramatic. My radio, which usually grumbles between stations at that hour, went completely silent for a few minutes and then popped back on with the same song I'd been listening to, like nothing had happened. The song didn't sound weird. It was just there, like a tape that had briefly been restarted. I shrugged it off. The fog made everything weird. Headlights looked like halos, signs spattered with moisture. I kept my speed down. A couple of miles in, a flock of birds rose up off the guardrail and scattered across the road in perfect low bursts. They didn't make a sound. Usually at least one of them would give a terrified chirp as it took off. That night they moved almost silently, and seeing them disappear into the wet air without sound gave me a small prickle along my forearms. I told myself it was a late migrating flock, nothing more. People who live near the water get used to odd animal behavior. They adapt. The fog tightened as I approached the overlook, where you can see the headlight reflections on the spray if a truck's headed the other way. A man in a reflective jacket had been standing on that turnout every week since the new cable guardrail went up. I assumed he was a contractor checking bolts, but tonight the turnout was empty. I passed his usual spot and thought, not for the first time, that the coast is full of people you see a few times and then they're gone. My phone, which I use mostly as a GPS and for the occasional podcast, had the map app open. The car's dash GPS does the same trick, but the phone is handier when the dashboard blurs in the damp. The map looked normal, my little blue dot rounding the curve, the road a thin gray vein. Then, for a breath, the dot jumped. It leapt off the road and blinked out over an expanse of deep blue where the map showed nothing but ocean. The app did an odd recalculation, the sort of silly little animation it makes when you take an unplanned turn, and for a second the screen showed my car floating somewhere in the middle of the Pacific. I laughed out loud at first, just because the absurdity of it broke the tension. The dot sat in open water, a tiny, ridiculous speck amid a wide swath of navy pixels. There were no landmasses near it, no tiny icons of boats or platforms, just empty map. The app labeled the point with latitude and longitude, and an estimate that I was, according to the phone, about 3 miles offshore at 45 miles per hour. Panic didn't show up as the cinematic thing you see in movies. It was smaller and colder, a tightening behind my sternum, a sudden awareness of how loud the heater sounded, how soft the seatbelt felt. I glanced at the rear view. The road behind me was a ribbon, headlights far off in the fog. No overturned cars, no emergency vehicles. Nothing that would explain a navigation glitch that massive. I tapped the screen. The map lit up and snapped back to the road. My blue dot popped into position again, centered in the lane where my headlights painted the white line. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. In the real world, my car hadn't moved. My hand was still on the steering wheel in exactly the way it had been. The radio still stumbled between stations as if nothing else had happened. Still, I slowed, gradually, in that way you do when you want to look like you're being cautious and not like you're holding on to the brake for a dumb reason. The fog made everything haloed and the cliffside side smelled of salt and rust. I thought about calling the clinic, telling someone to meet me, to put a sign out by the old oak, but that felt like escalating something that might be a phone app glitch. I dismissed it as that, a GPS blip, satellites losing lock for a second in tricky terrain. Mobile reception on that stretch is flaky. It could have been the phone, it could have been the weather, and then 2 miles later, the phone did it again. This time the map animation was worse. The blue dot peeled off the road and accelerated into open ocean, then stuttered like a broken steam engine and stopped dead in a blank, featureless patch of map. For an instant, the app overlaid a rectangular dialog box that is supposed to say, recalculating route. Instead, it showed a set of coordinates and an altitude field. Altitude. The idea of altitude on an app I used to find my way home was a ridiculous misfit, like seeing a snow line in a desert. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white under the thin driving gloves, because the phone wasn't just making noise now, it was suggesting another reality. I pulled onto the shoulder, more abrupt this time, and killed the engine. Fog pressed against the windshield like breath. Every stray sound was amplified. A far-off gull, the steady thump of my own heart. The phone screen stayed alive, displaying that absurd ocean dot like a photograph of a lie. I tapped the app until it closed, then reopened it. The map was normal. The blue dot was back on the road. GPS satellites, I thought. Software. Settings. I went through the motions, turned the app off, toggled location services, looked at the phone system time, checked for updates. Everything appeared normal. Battery at 63%, 2 bars of signal, no warnings, no error messages. After a couple of minutes, I started the car and eased back into traffic. The world returned to smaller strangenesses. An old cat slinking across the outside lane that would have normally darted away into someone's yard, but instead kept to the edge of the asphalt like it had a reason to be there. The streetlight at the second corner, the one that usually flickers, was steady and bright. The one after that was dim, as if someone had nudged a dial between the poles. My watch buzzed, a calendar reminder I'd set that morning, and its time matched the stove clock in the house. The phone's map didn't misbehave again. When I pulled into our driveway, Anna was at the window, sleeves rolled up, mug in hand, small, domestic relief. She asked me if the clinic had been busy. I told her it had, and then because I knew she'd ask, and because it reflects how we share small anxieties, I held the phone up and showed her the last bit of the map where the app had briefly pictured me in the water. She laughed a little, because that's what she does to steady me. GPS is weird, she said. Maybe your phone's just drunk. We both laughed, and I felt a part of the tension slide away. I wiped the phone screen, set it on the counter, and we went to bed. The next morning, I pulled up the location history in the map app because part of me wanted proof, a clean explanation. The app showed my entire route, the gas station, the 2 curves, that turnout where the contractor usually stands, then a continuous line into the driveway. No ocean dips, no sudden coordinates. I checked the phone's system log and the diagnostics. Nothing flagged. The car's dash computer, which records speed and engine data, showed the same. Continuous drive. No stops except the one where I'd pulled over on the shoulder. There was no logging of an excursion into the water. I told a coworker about it at lunch, one of those lean in, you ever have your GPS freak confessions. He nodded and told me about a time a cop car's dash said he was driving in a cornfield in Nebraska while he was on a highway in Iowa. We traded stories like that, small mechanical betrayals that didn't amount to anything more than a story. He said satellites and terrain and weather could conspire to confuse receivers. He shrugged and returned to his sandwich. It's been a few weeks. The road is the same ribbon along the cliff, and the fog still comes in from the ocean like a slow river. I take the same turns. I know the houses, the spots where the road's edge crumbles, the little pullouts where kids sometimes lean to look at the water. The phone's map app hasn't misplaced me again. Maybe I had a fluke of software and weather and sheer bad timing. Maybe some satellite pinged wrong and my phone decided to play a mean joke. But every time I pass the overlook now, I slow down a little, even when Anna's not waiting up at the window. I check the mirrors more than I used to. There's a small, steady unease sometimes, a fuzz like static under conversation, and I notice more things. The silence of birds sometimes, a porch light that flicks off at just the wrong second, the way the fog sits heavier near the cliff than it does over the road. Nothing that proves anything, nothing to name. Just a feeling that sometimes in the middle of ordinary miles, the map of where you are can briefly insist you're somewhere else. That's all. It's not dramatic, it's not done to terrify you. It's just enough to make you look at the ocean at night and remember that maps are guesses, not guarantees.